Originals, How Non-Conformists Move the World by Adam Grant. Introduction. Adam Grant was the perfect choice to write this book. Adam has always been passionate about the science that studies human motivation, unveiling mysteries, and discovering truths about us. He is optimistic, timely, and ready to share profound insights and advice with anyone, from inside their homes to their companies or communities, to make this world a better place. He is also a dedicated friend and an inspiration who helped me believe in myself and understand how to effectively protect my ideas. Adam is one of the most influential people in my life. I believe that through these wonderful pages, he will also enlighten, inspire, and support you on your own journey. The Unveiler of Mysteries. It is often assumed that only a few people are born creative, while the majority rarely come up with original ideas. Some are born leaders, while most are just followers. Only a few can make a real impact, while the majority cannot. Through this work, Adam shatters all these assumptions and proves that any of us can elevate our creative abilities. Adam reveals how to identify truly original and actionable ideas. At the same time, he shares with us when to trust our instincts and when to rely on others. He even shows us how to become better parents by nurturing creativity in children and better managers, by fostering original ideas instead of adopting rigid, rule-bound thinking. Through each page, I learned that great innovators don't necessarily have the deepest expertise, but they need to see the clearest prospects. I realized that success often doesn't come from being ahead of others, but from patiently waiting for the right moment to act. And I was amazed to hear the author say that procrastination can actually be a good thing. Anyone who has collaborated with me knows that I absolutely hate working under last-minute pressure. For me, anything that can be done should be done immediately. Mark Zuckerberg and many others would surely be pleased if I could alleviate the constant pressure of pushing myself to finish everything early. But Adam thinks differently. He believes that procrastination can help me and my team achieve better results. Every day, all of us encounter things we like and things that need to be changed. The first brings us joy. The second is the driving force, the desire to change the world, to make it more ideal than how we usually see it. But changing deep-seated behaviors and beliefs is not easy. We passively accept the status quo because changing reality seems almost impossible. But then we ask ourselves, can one swallow make a summer? And in our bravest moments we ask, could that person be me? Adam's powerful answer is, yes. This book will prove that any of us can come up with the most brilliant ideas to improve their world. I met Adam when his first book, Give and Take Asterisk, was making waves in Silicon Valley. I read it and immediately started quoting its content to anyone who would listen. Adam is not only a talented researcher, but also a natural teacher and storyteller. He can explain complex ideas in an incredibly simple and understandable way. Later, my husband invited Adam to speak to his team at the company, and we had dinner together. Adam in person was just like the person he was on the pages of his book. His knowledge was as rich as an encyclopedia, and his positive energy radiated to everyone. Adam and I talked about how to use his research to shed light on the gender debate, and we began collaborating. From there, we conducted research and wrote a series of works on women and work. Lena Norg greatly benefited from his superior analysis and commitment to gender equality. Once a year, Facebook holds a global meeting for its team, and in 2015, I invited Adam to be the keynote speaker. Everyone was incredibly impressed by his intellect and humor. Months later, people were still talking about Adam's profound insights and putting his advice into action. Over time, Adam and I became friends. When tragedy struck and my husband suddenly passed away, Adam acted like a true friend. He stepped into my life during my worst time, just as he handled every other problem with his unique psychological insight and boundless generosity. When I thought I would never feel better, Adam flew across the country to see me, just to explain what I could do to rebuild my mindset. When I couldn't find a way to deal with an incredibly painful situation, he helped me find answers I didn't think existed. When I needed a shoulder to cry on, Adam was always there for me. In the deepest definition of friendship, a friend is someone who sees your potential more than you see it in yourself. That is the person who helps you become the perfect version of yourself. The magic of this book is that Adam will become such a friend to the reader. He offers a lot of advice on how to overcome doubt and fear, how to speak up and present ideas, and how to find allies in seemingly impossible places. He provides practical guidance on how to control anxiety and anger, how to find strength in weakness, the path to overcoming obstacles, and how to give hope to others. This is one of the most important and engaging books I have ever read, full of astonishingly powerful ideas. This book will not only change the way you see the world, but can also change your life. It can also inspire you to change the world itself. Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook and founder of Lean.org. Part 1. 4 college friends set out to revolutionize a niche business, drowning in debt with crooked, broken glasses. They racked their brains trying to find a way to earn money to replace their glasses. One of them had worn broken glasses for 5 years, using a paperclip to hold the frames together. Although an ophthalmologist had twice suggested he replace his glasses, he didn't want to pay for expensive new lenses. Luxottica, the giant dominating the eyewear industry, held over 80% of the market share. To create affordable glasses, these students needed to overthrow that giant. Recently, seeing Zappos, the largest shoe retailer in the United States, change their business model by selling online, the young men wondered if they could implement a similar business model for eyewear. Every time they brought up this idea with people around them, they were met with harsh criticism. No one buys glasses online. People need to get their eyes measured and try on frames. It's true Zappos succeeded with online shoe sales, but eyeglasses are different. People insisted, if this were a great idea, a lot of people would have done it before you. None of these students had a background in e-commerce or technology, let alone retail, fashion, or apparel in general. Despite being told it was a crazy idea, they turned down attractive job offers to start their company. They would sell glasses that typically retailed for $500 in traditional stores for $95 on their online sales website and donate another pair of glasses to any customer in developing countries. This business model relied on the e-commerce functionality of the website. Without such a website, customers wouldn't be able to view or purchase products. After struggling to build the website, they finally launched their official site at 4:00 a.m. in February 2010. The company was named Warby Parker, a combination of names from 2 characters in Jack Kerouac's novels who inspired them to bravely break free from societal chains and pressures to embark on their adventure. They instilled that spirit into their company culture, and their efforts paid off. Initially, the students expected to sell 1 or 2 pairs of glasses a day, but when GQ magazine called them the Netflix of eyewear, they hit their first-year sales target in less than a month. Sales were so fast that they had a waiting list of 20,000 customers. It took them 9 months to restock sufficiently. Not long after, when Fast Company magazine announced its list of the world's most innovative companies in 2015, Warby Parker was not only on the list but ranked at the top. The companies that previously led, like Google, Nike, and Apple, all had over 50,000 employees. Warby Parker, in contrast, was a newly launched startup with just 500 employees. In 5 years, the 4 student friends had built one of the leading fashion brands on the planet and donated over 1 million pairs of glasses to those in need. Annually, the company generated $100 million in revenue, and the brand was valued at over $1 billion. I recall that in 2009, one of the company's founders pitched the idea of selling glasses online to me and hoped I would invest in Warby Parker. But I declined. That was one of the worst financial decisions I ever made, and I needed to understand where I went wrong. I want to talk about the word original. The adjective original means the source or beginning of something where it originates, arises, or transforms. The noun original means something unique, one of a kind, or distinctive. A person who is appealingly and interestingly different from others. A person capable of creating completely new inventions or initiatives. Years ago, psychologists discovered 2 paths to achievement: conformity and originality. Conformity is following the crowd or tradition and maintaining the status quo. Originality is venturing down less traveled paths with fresh ideas that challenge the status quo and make things better. Of course, nothing is entirely new. Original, in the sense that all our ideas are influenced by what we learn from the world around us. We constantly borrow thoughts, whether intentionally or unintentionally. We are also susceptible to cryptomnesia, unconsciously remembering and transforming others' ideas into our own. Therefore, I want to define originality as introducing and developing ideas that are somewhat unusual in a certain field but have the potential to become reality. Originality stems from creativity generating new and useful ideas, but it doesn't stop there. It also involves implementing initiatives to make that vision a reality. The founders of Warby Parker broke through with the dream of a unique sales method, selling eyeglasses online, and became pioneers in establishing an accessible and affordable online sales channel. This book is about how we can become more original. In fact, there's a surprising clue right in the web browsers you use every day to access the internet. Finding faults in default designs. Not long ago, economist Michael Hausman led a project to understand why some customer service companies lasted longer than others. With data collected from calls to over 30,000 employees from banks, airlines, and mobile phone companies, he suspected that their hiring history contained clues about their commitment levels. He thought that people with more job changes were more likely to quit early, but that wasn't actually the case. The intention to quit among employees who had changed 5 jobs in 5 years was no higher than among those who had stayed in the same job for 5 years. Looking for other clues, Hausman noticed that his team had recorded information about the internet browser job applicants used. Suddenly, he had the idea to check if the choice of browser during job application was related to the decision to quit. He didn't expect to find a correlation and assumed that browser preference was purely a matter of taste or personal choice. But when he looked at the results, he was astonished. Employees who used Firefox or Chrome during the job application process tended to stay in their jobs 15% longer than employees who used Internet Explorer or Safari. Believing it might just be a coincidence, Hausman performed a similar analysis on employees who had left their jobs. He obtained a similar pattern of results. Firefox and Chrome users were 19% less likely to be fired than Internet Explorer and Safari users. He then conducted a performance evaluation study. His team collected nearly 3 million data points on sales, customer satisfaction, and average call duration. The results showed that Firefox and Chrome users achieved significantly higher sales and had shorter customer call times, and their customers were more satisfied. Firefox and Chrome users reached high customer satisfaction levels in just 90 days of work, while Internet Explorer and Safari users took up to 120 days. The browsers themselves were not the reason why users chose, trusted, and achieved success. Rather, it was a signal of their preference for habitual browser use. Why were Firefox and Chrome users more committed and performed better on every metric? The obvious answer was that they were more tech-savvy. So, I asked Hausman if he noticed that. Oh, employees took all sorts of aptitude tests to assess their ability to use keyboard shortcuts, software, and hardware, including typing speed. The results showed that Firefox and Chrome users were not better computer users, nor were they faster or more accurate typists. Even after evaluating test scores, the browser effect on them remained unchanged. Computer knowledge and skills were not the reasons for their advantage. What made the difference was how users chose their browser. If you are using a Microsoft desktop computer, Internet Explorer is installed by default with the Windows operating system. If you use an Apple computer, Safari is the default browser. Almost 2/3 of customer service companies use default browser systems and never wonder if better software exists. To install Firefox or Chrome, you have to have some knowledge and download a different browser. Instead of accepting the default browser, you explore and discover a better option. And that small creative act is a gateway to different results. Customer service companies using default browsers like Internet Explorer and Safari often use preset scripts for sales calls and follow standard operating procedures for handling customer complaints. They adhere to fixed rules in their job descriptions. So, when dissatisfied with their work, they start taking days off or even quitting. Employees who prefer to take the initiative to switch from the default browser to Firefox or Chrome have a very different approach to work. They seek new sales methods and handle customer complaints more proactively. When faced with unpleasant situations, they focus on problem solving. Because they actively solve problems, they have very few reasons to quit their jobs. They create work as they wish. They create exceptions instead of being bound by any rules. We live in the era of Internet Explorer. Like most 2/3 of customer service employees who use this pre-installed browser, many of us accept the defaults in our lives. In a series of striking studies, a team led by political psychologist John Jost surveyed people's reactions to undesirable default conditions. Compared to European Americans, African Americans were less satisfied with their economic circumstances, but perceived economic inequality as more legitimate and fair than European Americans did. Compared to those in the highest income tax bracket, those in the lowest tax bracket considered economic inequality more acceptable, with their agreement level 17% higher. When asked if they would support laws limiting civil rights and press criticism of the government, if the government enacted such laws were necessary to solve national problems, more than twice as many low-income individuals were willing to give up freedom of speech compared to high-income individuals. After noticing that disadvantaged groups insisted on supporting the status quo more than advantaged groups, Jost and his colleagues concluded, it's a paradox that those who suffer the most from an institution are often the least likely to question, challenge, reject, or change it. To explain this peculiar phenomenon, Jost's team developed a theory of system justification. The core idea of this theory is that people tend to rationalize the status quo, even when it goes against their own interests. In one study, they tracked Democratic and Republican candidates before the 2000 U.S. presidential election. When George W. Bush won more votes, Republicans rated him as more likable, and strangely, Democrats also agreed as they prepared explanations for that outcome. The same thing happened when Al Gore's chances of success increased. Both Republicans and Democrats rated him as more advantageous. Regardless of political ideology, when a candidate is on the path to victory, people tend to like him more. When his chances of success decrease, they like him less. System justification has a soothing effect. It's an emotional pain reliever. If something is just the way it is, we don't have to be upset about it. Of course, such acceptance also robs us of the courage to stand up against injustice and the creative will to seek other, potentially more effective, options. The hallmark of originality is rejecting the default and exploring better options. I have spent over a decade researching this issue, and it turns out it's not as difficult as I predicted. The starting point is curiosity. Ask yourself why such defaults existed in the first place. Déjà vu occurs when we encounter something new but seem to have seen it before. Vujade, on the other hand, is when we confront something very familiar but with a different perspective, helping us generate new ideas for old problems. Without a Vujade moment, Warby Parker wouldn't exist. When the founders sat in the computer lab late at night brainstorming ideas for their company, they had collectively spent 60 years wearing glasses. These glasses were always ridiculously expensive, but they accepted that status quo as a given, never questioning it until their company was born. That thought never crossed my mind, said co-founder Dave Gilboa. I always considered them health-related purchases. Once the optician sold me glasses, I believed the price had been reasonably considered. Until recently, while standing in line at an Apple store to buy an iPhone, Dave suddenly found himself comparing the two products. Eyeglasses had been a familiar product in human life for nearly 1,000 years and had changed little since his great-grandparents used them. For the first time, Dave wondered why eyeglasses were so expensive. Why was such a simple product more expensive than a complex new phone? Anyone could ask such a question and find the same answer as the Warby Parker team did. Once they questioned the unreasonable price, they began researching the eyewear industry and learned that it was because the industry was dominated by Luxottica, a European company that had generated over $7 billion the previous year. Dave said, "We understood that Luxottica owned the brands LensCrafters and Pearle Vision, Ray-Ban, and Oakley. They licensed sunglasses and prescription frames to Chanel and Prada. Suddenly, all this made me think why those glasses were so expensive. Production costs couldn't possibly push the price up that high." Leveraging its monopoly, Luxottica priced its products up to 20 times their production cost. That default was not legal. It was a choice made by a group of people in the company. And this meant that another group could make alternative choices. Dave suddenly realized the problem. We can make a difference. If we can control our destiny, we can control our own prices. When we become curious about the annoying defaults in this world, we begin to realize that most of them have the same social origin, human-made rules and systems. That realization gives us the courage to find ways to change them. Before women gained the right to vote in the US, many of them had never considered this inequality, simply viewing it as natural. Historian Jean Baker said, "As the women's suffrage movement grew stronger, an increasing number of women began to realize that customs, religious rules, and laws were actually human creations and therefore could be reversed or changed." The two faces of ambition. The pressure to accept defaults often appears earlier than we think. If we consider individuals as adults who leave their mark on the universe, the first group to mention is child prodigies. These geniuses learn to read by age 2, play Bach by 4, study mathematics by 6, and can speak 7 languages fluently by 8. Their classmates become envious, but their parents are as happy as if they'd won the lottery. However, according to literary critic T.S. Eliot, they often tend to end their careers in sorrow, not glory. Child prodigies, it turns out, are not born to change the world. When psychologists study the most outstanding and influential people in history, they discover that many of them were not child prodigies. And if you gather a large group of child prodigies and follow their lives, you'll find that they don't shine any brighter than their peers from average families. Intuitively, we find this makes sense. We assume that child prodigies are well-versed in academic knowledge but lack practical skills. While possessing superior intelligence, they lack social, emotional, and practical life skills. However, when looking at the evidence, this explanation seems unfounded, as less than 25% of child prodigies suffer from emotional and social problems. The majority are socially well-adjusted. For instance, they are extremely enthusiastic about a spelling bee at a cocktail party. Although child prodigies are often rich in both talent and ambition, what prevents them from changing the world is that they don't know how to be original. So, when they perform in Carnegie Hall, win science Olympiads, or become chess champions, the tragedy occurs. Practicing makes them perfect, but it doesn't create anything new. They learn the sparkling melodies of Mozart and the beautiful symphonies of Beethoven. But they themselves can never compose original music. They focus their energy on absorbing existing scientific knowledge, but don't create new concepts. They adapt to rule-based systems of programmed games instead of creating new rules. On their life's journey, they strive for parental satisfaction and teacher praise. Studies have shown that the most creative children are the least likely to be teachers' pets. In one study, elementary school teachers listed their most and least favorite students, then rated the two groups on a list of personality traits. The least favorite students were disobedient. They made their own rules. Teachers tended to discriminate more against highly creative students, labeling them as troublemakers. To survive in class, these children quickly learned to adapt to the curriculum the teacher set, but kept their original ideas to themselves. As William Derry-Zeux puts it, they become the best sheep on the planet. In adulthood, many prodigies become experts in their fields and leaders in their organizations. However, only a few of these child geniuses become true innovators. Psychologist Ellen Winner laments, they suffer a painful transition from a child who learns quickly and easily in an established environment to an adult capable of building their own career. Most prodigies never make that leap. They apply their extraordinary abilities in conventional ways, doing work without questioning what exists or is defaulted, or without making any new waves. In every field they enter, they maintain a certain level of safety by following conventional paths to success. They become conventional doctors who make no effort to fix a flawed healthcare system that prevents many patients from affording care that was flawed from the start. They become lawyers who defend clients for violating outdated laws without trying to change the laws. They become teachers who write lesson plans without asking why their students are learning what they are learning. While we rely on them to keep the world running smoothly, they make us operate like we're on a treadmill. Prodigies often lack the drive for achievement. To succeed, they must take responsibility for creating the world's greatest achievements. When we are determined to excel, we are motivated to work harder, more persistently, and smarter. But when a culture is filled with a significant number of achievements, originality manifests in a few other characteristics. However, the urge to achieve at a very high level can overshadow originality. The more you want to achieve, the more you fear failure. Instead of aiming for one-of-a-kind achievements, the intense desire for success makes us content with safe, and of course, unremarkable results. Psychologists Todd Lubart and Robert Sternberg state that once people cross the threshold of mediocre needs, that is, the need for achievement, they become less creative. The drive for success, coupled with the fear of failure, has prevented the emergence of history's greatest innovators and change agents. Concerned with maintaining stability and achieving conventional successes, they do not desire to pursue originality. Instead of being fully prepared to secure their future, they are enticed, persuaded, and forced to carve out their own niche. If a certain number of people had not been persuaded to engage in original behavior, the United States probably wouldn't exist. The civil rights movement might only have been a dream. The Sistine Chapel might have remained bare, without paintings. We might still believe that the sun revolves around the earth, and personal computers might never have become globally widespread. From our perspective today, the Declaration of Independence seems like a certainty. But it almost didn't happen due to the reluctance of key revolutionaries. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Jack Rakove recounts that those in commanding roles in the American Revolution were not like revolutionaries, but rather people with rich imaginations. They only became self-sacrificing revolutionaries later. In the years leading the war, John Adams feared British retaliation and hesitated to abandon his nascent legal career. He only began participating after being elected a delegate to the First Continental Congress. George Washington focused on managing his wheat, flour, fish, and stud farm businesses. He only became involved in the dispute after Adams nominated him as Commander-in-Chief of the Army. "I have made every effort to avoid participating in these wars," Washington wrote. Nearly 2 centuries later, Martin Luther King Jr. was apprehensive about leading the civil rights movement. He only dreamed of becoming a pastor and university president. In 1955, the movement suddenly ignited after a black woman, Rosa Parks, was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white man, as mandated by Jim Crow laws. They agreed to form the Montgomery Improvement Association and launch the bus boycott. And one of the attendees nominated King for the position of president. King said, "It happened so fast that I didn't even have time to think. I think if I had had time to think, I probably would have declined." Just 3 weeks prior, King and his wife had agreed, "I shouldn't take on any heavy public responsibilities because I have to finish my dissertation and need to focus more on my church work." He was anonymously elected to lead the bus boycott. When faced with the task of speaking to the community that evening, he said, "I was truly plagued by fear." But King soon overcame those anxieties, and by 1963, his powerful voice had helped unite a nation with a vision of freedom. But that only happened when a colleague of King's suggested that he should be the one to deliver the closing speech at the March on Washington and rallied a coalition of leaders to advocate for him. When Pope Julius asked Michelangelo to paint a fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo was largely uninterested because he considered himself a sculptor, not a painter, and found the work so suffocating that he fled to Florence. It took 2 years for Michelangelo to complete the painting due to the Pope's persistence. And astronomy stagnated for decades because Nicolaus Copernicus refused to publish his initial discovery that the Earth revolved around the sun. Fearing rejection and ridicule, he kept that secret for 22 years, sharing his findings only with friends. Eventually, a respected cardinal learned of his work and wrote a letter encouraging Copernicus to publish it. Even then, Copernicus delayed for another 4 years. His masterpiece only saw the light of day one day after a young mathematics professor personally took charge, turning Copernicus's theory into a book and publishing it under his own name. Nearly half a millennium later, an angel investor proposed to Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak that he would inject $250,000 into Apple in 1977, but with an ultimatum. Wozniak had to leave Hewlett-Packard. Wozniak refused. "I'll work for Hewlett-Packard my whole life. "I really don't want to start my own company, I'm scared," he admitted. But Wozniak changed his mind after receiving encouragement from Steve Jobs, as well as many friends and his parents. Can you imagine how many Wozniaks, Michelangelos, and Kings gave up pursuing, publicizing, or promoting original ideas because it wasn't their vision? While we may not all wish to start our own company, create a masterpiece, transform Western thought, or lead a civil rights movement, we can certainly propose ideas to improve our workplaces, schools, and communities. Sadly, many of us hesitate to act on these new ideas. According to renowned economist Joseph Schumpeter, originality is an act of creative destruction. Advocating for new systems often requires breaking down outdated ways of working and overcoming the fear of venturing into new territory. Among nearly 1,000 scientists at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, over 40% feared retaliation if they spoke out publicly about drug safety and food hygiene issues. Among more than 40,000 employees at a technology company, half felt unsafe expressing dissenting opinions at work. When interviewing employees in consulting, financial services, media, pharmaceutical, and advertising companies, 85% chose to remain silent about their concerns rather than report them to their superiors. What did you do with your last original idea? Although America is a land that champions individualism and self-expression, in the pursuit of perfection and in fear of failure, most of us choose to conform rather than stand out. Thomas Jefferson advised that on matters of style, swim with the current, but on matters of principle, stand like a rock. The pressure to be perfect makes us do the opposite. We display originality in superficial ways: a bow tie, bright red shoes, without daring to embrace the risks of true originality. When powerful ideas and core values arise in our minds, we self-censor. Renowned senior executive Melody Hobson states, "There is very little originality in life because people are afraid to speak up and afraid to stand out." So, what human habits help them transcend superficial originality to achieve true, inner originality? The right thing. To be original, you need to take breakthrough risks. This belief is so ingrained in our cultural psyche that we rarely stop to think about it. We admire astronauts like Neil Armstrong and Sally Ride for the right reasons, for bravely leaving the only planet humans live on and venturing into space. We applaud heroes like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who, with strong convictions, risked their lives for cherished moral principles. We idolize icons like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates for daring to drop out of college, enduring multiple bankruptcies, and living in garages to realize their technological visions. When we marvel at the original individuals who have found creativity and driven world-changing developments, we tend to assume they are very different. This is like assuming some people are lucky enough to be born with genetic mutations that make them resistant to cancer, obesity, and HIV. Thus, we believe that great innovators are born with a biological immunity to risk. They are thought to embrace uncertainty and disregard social approval. They simply don't worry about the consequences of not conforming. They are programmed to break with rebellious beliefs, create disruptive revolutions, operate independently, going against the grain, unaffected by fear, rejection, or mockery. The term entrepreneur was coined by economist Richard Cantillon, literally meaning risk-taker. When we read the story of Warby Parker's rapid rise, this issue becomes clearer than ever. Like all great innovators, this quartet changed the world because they were willing to take a leap of faith. After all, if you don't jump the fence, you can't get into the house, right? 6 months before Warby Parker launched, one of the co-founders sat in my Wharton classroom stall, with a friendly face, curly dark hair, and a calm demeanor. Neil Blumenthal achieved these accomplishments because what he did stemmed from a nonprofit purpose. He genuinely yearned to create a better world. When he presented the company's idea to me, like many skeptics, I told him it was an interesting idea, but it was hard to imagine people ordering glasses online. As a long-time skeptical consumer, I knew it would take extraordinary effort to build a company from scratch. But when I learned that Neil and his friends had dedicated all their time preparing for the launch, all my thoughts about their failure completely vanished. My first objection against them was when I talked to Neil. If they truly believed in Warby Parker's success, they should have dropped out of school to focus all their time on making the idea a reality. Neil replied, "We wanted to play it safe. We weren't sure if it was a good idea, and there were no signs of success. So, we spent all our free time during our school years researching it. We were 4 friends before we started and agreed that honest communication about work was more important than success. But then the summer came, allowing us to focus full-time on the work. What about the other 3? Neil admitted. We all took internships. I went into consulting, Andy went into venture capital, and Dave worked in healthcare. Due to limited time and divided focus, they still hadn't completed the company website, and it took them 6 months to agree on a company name. At 2 points, I gave them a second yellow card of skepticism. However, before completely refusing to join the project, I remembered they would all graduate at the end of the year. That meant they could finally dedicate all their time to this business venture together. Neil changed his perspective. Yes, but that's not necessary. We remain neutral. Only if this project didn't work would we accept full-time jobs after graduation. Jeff did too. And to ensure he had many options, Dave took 2 different internships during the summer and told his employers about the possibility of returning to work later. My third objection. They backed down, and so did I. I became a professor because I am passionate about exploring new ideas, sharing knowledge, and teaching future generations of students. But in the most honest moments of my life, I also yearned to escape the comfort zone of my current job. I never had the confidence to start a business in my 20s. If I had the chance, I would definitely have stayed in school and taken a job related to my background. When I compared Warby Parker's path to the image of successful entrepreneurs in my mind, I found they didn't match. Neil and his associates lacked the courage to embark on that path with a burning conviction, which made me doubt their belief and commitment. They weren't serious enough about becoming successful entrepreneurs. They weren't risk-takers enough for a fight. In my mind, they would fail because they played it too safe instead of betting everything on the project. But in reality, this was precisely why they succeeded. I want to expose the imaginative thinking that originality requires extreme risk-taking and convince you that true originality goes far beyond what we perceive. In every field, from business and politics to science and art, the people who push the world forward with their original ideas are rarely models of unwavering conviction and commitment. When they challenge tradition and the status quo, they outwardly display boldness and confidence. But beneath that veneer, the truth is they also struggle with fear, contradictions, and self-doubt. We see them as trailblazers, but their efforts are often driven and sometimes even forced by others. And the more they appear willing to take risks, the more they actually want to avoid them. In an interesting study, 2 management researchers, Joseph Raffi and Greg F., posed a simple question. When starting a business, should you keep or quit your day job? From 1994 to 2018, they tracked a nationwide survey group of over 5,000 Americans in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s who had become entrepreneurs. The results showed that whether they kept or quit their day jobs, these founders were not driven by financial needs. Individuals with high household incomes or high salaries were less likely to quit their jobs to become full-time entrepreneurs. A survey found that the riskiest individuals were those who took risks with the highest confidence. Entrepreneurs who maintained neutrality by starting a business while keeping their day jobs were those who resisted risk and self-doubt. If you think like most people, you would predict a clear advantage for those who take risks with the highest confidence. However, the research showed precisely the opposite. Entrepreneurs who maintained their day jobs had a 33% lower failure rate than those who quit entirely to focus on their startup businesses. If you are risk-averse but doubt the feasibility of your idea, let the startup be a secondary endeavor. If you are a flamboyant gambler, the startup will be much more fragile. Just like Warby Parker's leadership, entrepreneurs whose companies topped Fast Company magazine's recent Most Innovative list still kept their day jobs, even after their companies launched. Former track star Phil Knight started selling running shoes out of the trunk of his car in 1964, but kept his accounting job until 1969. After inventing the first Apple computer, Steve Wozniak teamed up with Steve Jobs to found the company in 1976, but he continued to work full-time at Hewlett Packard until 1977. And although Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin found a way to significantly improve internet search engines in 1996, they did not give up their graduate research at Stanford until 1998. Page said, "We almost didn't start Google because we were so worried about dropping out of our PhD program." In 1997, fearing that their nascent search engine would distract them from their research, they tried to sell Google for less than $2 million in cash and stock. Fortunately, the potential buyers declined the offer. The habit of maintaining a day job is not limited to business success. Many influential creative minds still hold full-time jobs or pursue their studies even after earning income from major projects. Ava DuVernay, director of the film Selma, produced her first 3 films while still working as a journalist. She only pursued filmmaking full-time after making films for 4 years and winning many awards. Brian May was pursuing a PhD in astrophysics when he started playing guitar in a new band, but he didn't give up his research until several years later to dedicate his entire career to the rock band Queen. Not long after, he wrote, "We Will Rock You." Grammy winner John Legend released his first album in 2000, but continued to work as a management consultant until 2002. He still prepared PowerPoint presentations by day and performed at night. Horror writer Stephen King was a teacher, janitor, and gas station attendant for 7 years after writing his first story, and he only quit his job a year after his debut novel Carrie was published. Scott Adams, creator of the humorous comic strip Dilbert*, worked at Pacific Bell for 7 years after his first comic strip gained widespread popularity. Why do all these prominent figures of originality maintain safety in their careers instead of taking risks, like in a stock portfolio? Half a century ago, psychologist Clyde Coombs at the University of Michigan developed a groundbreaking theory of risk. In the stock market, if you plan to make a risky investment, you protect yourself by maintaining safety in other investments. Coombs suggested that in everyday life, successful people deal with risk similarly, through balancing their portfolios. When we take a risk in one area, we generally tend to compensate for those risks by being more cautious in other areas. If you plan to bet a lot of money on a hand of cards, you'll drive slower on the way to the casino. The risk portfolio explains why we often become original in one area while being quite conventional in others. Baseball executive Branch Rickey signed Jackie Robinson to his team to break the racial barrier, but refused to go to baseball games on Sundays, abstained from profanity, and never touched a drop of alcohol. T.S. Eliot's career-defining work, The Wasteland Asterisk, is praised as one of the most influential poems of the 20th century. But after its publication in 1922, Eliot continued his work at a London bank until 1925 because he refused to take career risks. Novelist Aldous Huxley noted after visiting Eliot's office, "Eliot is the brightest employee among all the bankers here." When he officially left his job at the bank, Eliot still didn't give up his day job. He spent the next 40 years working for a publisher to stabilize his life. On the other hand, he continued to write poetry. Polaroid founder Edwin Land once remarked, "No one can be original in one area if they don't have emotional and social stability in all other areas." But does a day job distract us from doing our best original work? The common view is that creative achievements cannot flourish without intense focus of time and energy, and companies cannot grow well without vigorous effort. These assumptions underestimate the core benefit of a balanced risk system. The need for safety in one area can provide the freedom to be original in another. By having a solid financial base, we can escape the pressure to publish immature books, sell low-quality artworks, or launch untested business methods. When Pierre Omidyar built eBay, it was simply a hobby. He continued to work as a programmer for the next 9 months, only giving up programming when he earned a higher income from eBay. Excellent entrepreneurs are not those who maximize risk. Linda Rottenberg, co-founder and CEO of Endeavor, recognized this based on decades of experience coaching the world's greatest entrepreneurs. They eliminate risk from risk-taking. Managing a balanced risk portfolio doesn't mean simply floating in the middle by taking moderate risks. Instead, unique success means taking maximum risk in one area and being more cautious in others. At 27, Sarah Blakely came up with the idea of creating footless, close-fitting shapewear. She took a big risk by investing all her $5,000 savings. To balance her risk portfolio, she maintained a full-time sales job for the next 2 years, then spent evenings and weekends designing prototypes, saving money by writing her own patent application instead of hiring a lawyer. Eventually, after founding Spanx, she became the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. A century earlier, Henry Ford began building his automotive empire while still working as chief engineer for Thomas Edison. The job provided him with the necessary security to experiment with new car inventions. He continued to work under Edison for 2 years after building the carburetor and a year after receiving a patent for it. What about Bill Gates? Wasn't he famous for dropping out of Harvard to start the Microsoft empire? Gates coded his first software program as a college student. He waited a full year before leaving school. Even then, he didn't quit entirely, but balanced his risk portfolio by taking a leave of absence from his studies. Entrepreneur Rick Smith noted, "Instead of being one of the world's biggest risk takers, Bill Gates is more accurately seen as one of the biggest risk minimizers." This risk minimization model created the breakthrough for Warby Parker. 2 of the co-founders, Neil Blumenthal and Dave Gilboa, became co-CEOs of the company. They rejected the standard advice to choose a single leader, believing it would be safer to have 2 people in leadership positions. This co-CEO model generated positive market reactions and increased the company's value from the outset. "Our number 1 priority had to be risk mitigation," Dave said. Warby Parker was not a basket I wanted to put all my eggs in. After founding the company, he continued to explore other business opportunities by tracking scientific discoveries within the university to assess their commercial potential. Having backup plans gave the founders additional confidence in a largely unproven business assumption, whether people would be willing to buy glasses online. Instead of merely acknowledging these uncertainties, they actively worked to mitigate the risks. "We constantly discussed ways to mitigate business risks," Neil said. "This entire journey was a series of should and shouldn't decisions. At every stage, we tested and balanced everything." The 4 friends participated in a business class and spent months refining their business plan to minimize risk. To help customers feel more comfortable with the unfamiliar method of buying glasses online, they decided to offer free returns. But individual and focus group surveys showed that people were still hesitant to order glasses online. Neil recalled, "Many people didn't place orders. That really made us doubt the entire business plan." That was the moment we lost significant confidence. This led them back to their initial plan. After long, detailed discussions, the team came up with a solution: implement a free home try-on program. Customers could order sample frames without any financial commitment, simply returning them if they didn't like them. This plan was actually less expensive than the previous free return option. Previously, if a customer bought frames with lenses and then returned them, Warby Parker would lose a lot of money because the lenses were custom-made for each frame. But if customers only tried on sample frames and returned them, the company could reuse them. Now, Dave could be confident and committed. "I decided that we had to be prepared to dedicate ourselves full-time to this. That's not a risk. It's not like I'm taking a huge leap of faith." The free home try-on program was so popular that Warby Parker had to temporarily halt it within 48 hours of its launch. There is growing evidence that entrepreneurs are not as risk-seeking as most of us, and that is a rare conclusion that economists, sociologists, and psychologists have actually agreed upon. In a study surveying over 800 Americans, entrepreneurs and employed adults were asked to choose one of 3 desired investment portfolios. A portfolio generating $5 million in profit with a 20% chance of success. B, a portfolio generating $2 million in profit with a 50% chance of success. C, a portfolio generating $1.25 million in profit with an 80% chance of success. Entrepreneurs were more likely to choose the last option, the safest choice. This held true regardless of income, wealth, age, gender, business experience, marital status, education, household size, and expectations of how well other businesses would perform. The author concluded, "We find that entrepreneurs are more risk-averse than the general population." This is just an optional result based on a survey. But when you observe the actual behavior of entrepreneurs, you will notice how much they avoid dangerous risks. Economists have found that successful entrepreneurs, even in their teenage years, broke rules and prohibitions 3 times more often than their peers. However, When you look deeper into their specific behaviors related to business, when they founded manufacturing companies, those teenagers only took calculated risks. When psychologists studied American twins and Swedish citizens, this research yielded similar results. Across these 3 studies, people who became successful entrepreneurs often had a teenage phase where they defied parental advice, hung out with friends despite curfews, skipped school, stole, gambled, drank alcohol, and smoked cannabis. However, they did not engage in dangerous activities like driving while intoxicated, buying illegal drugs, or stealing valuable items. All of this was true regardless of their socioeconomic status or their parents' household income. Originality is reflected in one's attitude towards risk. Some people are thrill seekers who love skydiving, while others are terrified. To be original, you need to try new things, which also means taking some risks. But the most successful originality doesn't come from those who are fearless, who jump before looking. They are those who reluctantly tiptoe to the edge of the cliff, calculate the slope, check their parachute 3 times, and set up a safety net below the landing zone in any situation. As Malcolm Gladwell wrote in the New Yorker *, many entrepreneurs take risks, but most of them fail. They are not the success stories. Disregarding social consensus is not what distinguishes people who take original paths. In a comprehensive analysis based on 60 studies involving over 15,000 entrepreneurs, those least concerned with pleasing others were generally not likely to become entrepreneurs or create breakthroughs for their companies. We can see a similar pattern in politics. When hundreds of historians, psychologists, and political scientists commented on U.S. presidents, they noted that the weakest leaders were those who followed the will of the people and the precedents set by their predecessors. The greatest presidents were those who dared to challenge the status quo and bring about rapid changes to improve many of the nation's problems. Yet, these behaviors were entirely unrelated to whether they had a deep concern for public approval and social harmony. Abraham Lincoln is often considered the greatest president in American history. When experts rated presidents based on their desire to please others and avoid conflict, Lincoln ranked highest on the list. He spent 4 hours a day dealing with office work with the public and pardoned deserters during the Civil War. Before signing the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln agonized for over 6 months about whether to free the slaves. He wondered if he had the constitutional authority to do so. He worried that his decisions could lose the support of the southern border states, prolong the war, and devastate the country. Originality is not a fixed trait. It is a free choice. Lincoln did not possess an innately original personality. Therefore, engaging in unscheduled debates was not programmed in his genes, but was an act of conscious will. The great thinker W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, "He was like one of us, and he became Abraham Lincoln." Often, control is lost within our daily work and lives. A few years ago, Google asked Amy Wrzesniewski, a talented professor at Yale University, to help with a series of administrative and sales tasks. These were jobs where the person performing them had no freedom, perception, status, or opportunity to participate in exciting projects like the company's engineers. I, along with her and another colleague, Justin Berg, traveled to California, New York, Dublin, and London to seek solutions. Many employees were so dedicated to Google that they revealed they accepted their jobs as defaults because they believed that the work and their interactions with others in the job created a solid foundation that they didn't question whether to adjust them. To unlock that mindset, we collaborated with Jennifer Kurkowski and Brian Well, the 2 innovators behind Google's People Analytics work. We designed a workshop for hundreds of employees, hoping to share that work is not a static sculpture, but a flexible building block. We provided examples of people who became architects of their own jobs, customizing their tasks and relationships to better fit their interests, skills, and values. Like an artistic salesperson who volunteered to design a new logo and a financial analyst who communicated with clients via video chat instead of email. Ultimately, they looked at their familiar work in an entirely new way, viewed to confronting the familiar from a new perspective. They offered new and more ideal ways of looking at their roles while remaining grounded in reality. Managers and colleagues evaluated each employee's performance and happiness before the workshop, then weeks and months later. The entire experience lasted only 90 minutes, so we weren't sure it would make much of a difference. However, after 6 weeks, Google employees randomly selected to express their thoughts about their jobs showed signs of increased happiness and work performance. After considering ways to adjust their work, they immediately acted to improve it. Employees in the control group, who did not attend the workshops, showed no changes in happiness or performance. When we added an element to encourage employees to view their skills and work more flexibly, the results lasted at least 6 months. Instead of just using their existing abilities, they initiated developing capabilities to create creative and personalized work. As a result, they were 70% more likely to be promoted than their colleagues or transitioned into new, highly coveted roles. By refusing to stick to default jobs and skills, they became happier and more effective workers and upgraded themselves to better fit new roles, gradually recognizing and overcoming their limitations. Having revealed that successful originality often begins with questioning life's defaults and balancing risk portfolios, the rest of the book will address narrowing the gap between perception and action. When you have a new idea, how do you fight to make it a reality? As an organizational psychologist at Wharton, I have spent over a decade researching originality in a range of established systems, from tech companies and banks to schools, hospitals, and government offices. I have also identified some of the most exceptional examples of originality in our time and want to share the stories of these wise individuals so that each of us can become more original without harming our relationships, reputations, and careers. I hope these findings will help you develop the courage and strategy to pursue originality, providing the leadership knowledge needed to create a culture of originality in your teams and organizations. Using research and stories from every field, from business and politics to sports and entertainment, I will focus on the seeds of creative and ethical change and the organizational barriers that hinder progress. The first part of this book focuses on managing proposed risks, identifying and expressing original ideas. By definition, new ideas are full of uncertainty, and strong evidence describes how we hone the skill of separating the wheat from the chaff to avoid the risks of betting on bad ideas and overlooking good ones. Once you've conceived a potential idea, the next step is to present its effectiveness. I will share some best practices to illuminate how you choose messages and whom you need to consult to be heard more and criticized less. Throughout the journey, you will discover why the most popular TV show of all time was almost canceled, why an entrepreneur shared his startup story by highlighting the reasons no one invested in them, how a CIA analyst convinced her intelligence community to stop keeping secrets, and how a woman 3 levels below at Apple challenged Steve Jobs and won. The second part of the book addresses choices for achieving originality. I will start with timing. Be cautious about being a pioneer, as acting early often entails more risks. Surprisingly, some of the greatest creative achievements and history-changing innovations stemmed from procrastination. The tendency to delay and postpone helped entrepreneurs build long-lasting companies, leaders pioneer transformational efforts, and innovators maintain their originality. Then I will return to the challenges of alliance building, investigating how to increase support for an original idea and minimize the risk of rejection. The unsung heroes of the women's suffrage movement will illustrate why enemies make better allies than frenemies, and how shared values can be divisive rather than unifying. A founder who hid his company's mission from employees and a Hollywood director who adapted Disney cartoons will demonstrate how to recruit collaborators by balancing idealism with pragmatism and blending the familiar with the new. The third part of the book concerns fostering and sustaining originality, both in life and at work. I will explore how to nurture originality in children, explaining how parents, siblings, and role models shape a child's rebellious tendencies. You will learn why the batting average of professional baseball players correlates with their birth order. The best comedians in America share common family backgrounds, and those who risked their lives to carry out courageous rescues during the Holocaust often came from strict parents. A nation's innovation and economic growth can stem from the books we read to our children. From there, I will examine why some cultures idolize conformity and how leaders encourage employees to express dissenting opinions, allowing originality and diversity to flourish. You will learn from a brilliant financial billionaire who fired an employee for not criticizing him, an inventor who struggled to popularize his achievement, and an expert who helped change unspoken norms at NASA after the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. I will conclude with reflections on the emotions that hinder us from pursuing originality. You will gain insights into managing fear and apathy from a group of 20-somethings who fought to overthrow a dictator and a lawyer who advocated for climate change by swimming in the Arctic. These examples demonstrate that silence is not the best way to manage anxiety, and that it can be counterproductive when we are angry, and that pessimism can sometimes provide more energy than optimism. Ultimately, it is those who dare to challenge originality who drive the world forward. After years of research and interaction with them, I have found that their inner experiences are no different from ours. They feel the same fears and doubts as most of us. What makes them different is that they act anyway. Deep down, they realize that even if they fail, they will regret it less than not trying at all. Part 2. The Astute Investor and the Blind. Investor: the art and science of recognizing original ideas. At the turn of the century, an invention swept through Silicon Valley. Steve Jobs called it the greatest piece of technology since the personal computer. Excited by the invention, Jobs offered to invest $63 million for a 10% stake in the company. When the inventor declined, Jobs did something uncharacteristic. He offered to provide free consultation to the inventor for the next 6 months. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos reviewed the product and was immediately captivated. "You have a revolutionary product. You will have no problem selling this invention." John Doerr, the legendary investor who successfully bet on Google and many other startups, invested $80 million in the deal, predicting it would be the fastest company to reach $1 billion and more impactful than the internet itself. The inventor himself was described as a modern-day Thomas Edison, with an impressive list of breakthrough inventions. His portable kidney dialysis machine was voted Medical Product of the Year. His portable infusion pump reduced the time patients had to stay in the hospital, and his coronary stent invention was used to clear Vice President Dick Cheney's heart. He accumulated hundreds of patents and received America's highest honor in invention, the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, from President Bill Clinton. The inventor predicted that within a year, sales of his latest product would reach 10,000 units per week. However, 6 years later, they had only sold a total of about 30,000 units. More than a decade passed, and the company still hadn't turned a profit. Though it was lauded as a product that would profoundly change people and cities, to this day it is only used in niche markets. That product was the Segway, a two-wheeled, self-balancing personal transportation device. Time magazine called it one of the decade's 10 biggest failed gadgets. Doerr admitted in 2013, "Segway was an investment failure, no question. I was wrong in some of my rather bold predictions about the Segway." Why could such knowledgeable business minds overlook the signs of failure? A few years prior, 2 comedians collaborated to produce a 90-minute television special. Lacking experience writing TV shows and quickly running out of resources, they shifted to the idea of a weekly 30-minute variety show. When they submitted the script, most broadcasters disliked or rejected it. One of the actors in the show described it as a hilarious mess. They filmed a pilot for an audience to evaluate. 100 audience members gathered in Los Angeles to discuss the show's strengths and weaknesses. They dismissed the show as a dismal failure. One audience member bluntly declared, "He's just a loser. Who wants to watch him perform?" After the show was screened for about 600 other audience members in 4 different cities, the summary report stated, "No audience member was eager to watch this show again." The performance was rated as too weak. Subsequent pilot episodes aired and, as expected, failed to gain traction. With the show's impact and negative audience reviews, it was truly in trouble, but one network encouraged the filmmakers to produce 4 more episodes. The show didn't air live until almost a year after the pilot, and once again, they failed to attract enthusiastic supporters. At the last minute, the network arranged to air half of this episode to replace a canceled show. But then, one of the scriptwriters considered giving up. They had run out of ideas, but the good news is that he later changed his mind and continued writing. In the decades that followed, the show became a dominant fixture on the Nielsen ratings and generated over $1 billion in revenue. The show became the most popular television series in America and was honored by TV Guide as the greatest show of all time. If you've ever complained about someone talking too close to you, admonished a party guest for double-dipping a potato chip into shared dip, and uttered the warning, "That's not okay to do," or rejected someone by saying, "There's no more dip for you," then you're using phrases from *Seinfeld*. So why did the network executives have so little faith in *Seinfeld? When we lament the lack of originality in the world, we often blame a deficit of creativity. Only by generating many novel ideas can we hope for better things. But in reality, the biggest obstacle to originality is not generating ideas, but selecting them. In one analysis, over 200 people conceived more than 1,000 ideas for new projects and products, of which 87% were highly original. Companies, communities, and nations are not necessarily short on ideas. They simply lack excellent people who can choose new ideas correctly. Segway is a classic case of a false positive, an idea predicted to be a hit, but it wasn't. Seinfeld exemplifies a false negative, predicted to fail, but ultimately achieving brilliant success. This chapter will discuss the barriers and best practices in idea selection to minimize betting on bad ideas. I have found skilled forecasters, people who have learned to avoid both false positives and false negatives. You will have the opportunity to meet two venture capitalists who predicted the Segway's failure and an NBC executive who didn't even work in comedy but passionately supported and funded *Seinfeld*. Their method is to study the relative importance of intuition and analysis in evaluating ideas, as well as how to assess the passion of the people behind these ideas. You will understand why managers and audiences struggle to accurately evaluate new ideas and how we can make better decisions when seizing an opportunity. The creative tightrope walk. The inventor of the Segway was a technology expert named Dean Kamen, whose wardrobe consisted of only one type of outfit: denim shirt, jeans, and work boots. When I asked venture capitalists to describe Kamen, their most common response was a genius. At 16, he single-handedly redesigned the lighting system for a museum and secured the president's approval to implement it. In the 1970s, he invented a portable infusion pump, earning enough profit to buy a jet, a helicopter, and a mansion in New Hampshire, complete with a computer store, an electronics lab, and a baseball field. In the 1980s, his portable kidney dialysis machine achieved resounding success. In the 1990s, Kamen designed the iBot, a wheelchair that could climb stairs. Recognizing the broad applicability of this technology, he and his team created the Segway. The purpose of this design was to build a fuel-efficient and safe vehicle to prevent pollution and help individuals navigate crowded cities. Due to its small size, light weight, and self-balancing capabilities, it was not only suitable for mail carriers, police officers, and golfers, but also had the potential to fundamentally change how people move every day. The Segway was the greatest technology Kamen had ever created, and he predicted that Segway's competition with cars would be similar to cars' competition with horse-drawn carriages. But can creators ever be objective targets for others to evaluate their own creative ideas? One of my former students, Justin Berg, now a talented professor at Stanford University, has researched this issue for years. Berg specializes in creative forecasting, the art of predicting the success of novel ideas. In one study, he showed circus performance videos to different groups of people and asked them to predict how good each performance was. Circus artists from Cirque du Soleil and other troupes predicted the popularity of videos featuring their own performances. Circus managers also watched the videos and made their predictions. To test the accuracy of the predictions, Berg measured the actual success of each performance by tracking the number of viewers who liked, shared, and funded the videos. He invited over 13,000 people to rate the videos. They also had the opportunity to share the videos via Facebook, Twitter, Google+, email, and received a 10-cent bonus they could then donate to the performers. The creators felt very bad knowing the audience's ratings of their performances. On average, when ranking their own videos against those of 9 other circus artists, they placed themselves too high. Managers, on the other hand, were more realistic. They maintained distance from the performances and viewed them more neutrally. Social scientists have long known that people tend to be overconfident when evaluating themselves. Here are some highlights of those findings. High school seniors. 70% reported having above-average leadership skills compared to 2% below average. Regarding ability to cooperate with others, 25% rated themselves in the top 1% and 60% rated themselves in the top 10%. College professors. 94% rated their work performance as above average. Engineers at two different companies. 32% and 42% rated themselves in the top 5% of employees. Entrepreneurs. When 3,000 small business owners rated the probability of success for various companies, they averaged their own businesses' prospects at 8.1 out of 10, but rated similar competing businesses at 5.9 out of 10. Overconfidence can be an especially difficult bias to overcome in creative fields. When you come up with a new idea, by definition it is unique. You disregard all past feedback on previous ideas. Even if your previous ideas failed, you assume this idea is different. When developing an idea, we often focus too much on our own tastes and forget about the audience's tastes to make accurate assessments. We get ecstatic in a eureka moment or the joy of overcoming an obstacle. Brandon Tartikoff, senior president of NBC's entertainment network, frequently reminded his producers, "No one walks in here with a bad idea." To some extent, entrepreneurs and inventors must truly believe in the success rate of their ideas, otherwise, they wouldn't have enough motivation to pursue them. But even after learning about audience preferences, they are still easily susceptible to what psychologists call confirmation bias, focusing on the strengths of ideas and ignoring or downplaying their limitations. After a career researching creative productivity, psychologist Dean Simonton found that even geniuses struggle with recognition once they achieve resounding success. In music, Beethoven was known as a self-aware critic. However, as Simonton noted, Beethoven's favorite symphonies, sonatas, and quartets are not the most frequently performed and recorded by posterity. In an analysis, psychologist Aaron Cosbelt delved into letters in which Beethoven rated 70 of his works and compared them to experts' assessments of these works. Of the 70 works, Beethoven identified 15 as false positives, meaning they were expected to be great but turned out not to be very successful, and 8 as false negatives, meaning they were criticized but ended up being excellent. This 33% error rate occurred despite the fact that Beethoven made many of his evaluations after receiving audience feedback. If creators knew the moment they were on the path to creating masterpieces, their work would only move forward. They would cease efforts to generate ideas when they knew they were successful. But over time, Simonton found that they would return to and repeat what they had prematurely discarded as unfinished. In Beethoven's most famous work, Symphony No. 5, he initially discarded the ending of the first movement because he found it too short and only reused it later. If Beethoven could distinguish a brilliant detail from a mediocre one, he would immediately have known this piece of music would be a success. When Picasso painted his famous Guernica to protest fascism, he created 79 different versions. Many of these were based on his initial sketches, not later variations. The later sketches proved themselves to be dead ends, which the artist, in the creative process, had no way of knowing were wrong turns. Simonton explained, if Picasso could evaluate his creations as he painted them, he would have had more energy and used it for subsequent drawings. But in reality, he often became colder and more bored. To find the prince, you must kiss many frogs. If originality isn't a reliable assessment of idea quality, how do we maximize our chances of creating a masterpiece? Simonton found that, on average, creative geniuses don't produce higher quality in their field than their peers. They simply generate a larger volume of work, which gives them more changes and higher chances of being original. Simonton recorded that the probability of creating an influential or successful idea is a positive function of the total number of ideas generated. Look at Shakespeare. Most of us are familiar with his small number of classics, forgetting that over 2 decades, he wrote 37 plays and 154 sonnets. Simonton tracked Shakespeare's popular plays, measuring how often they were performed and how widely they were praised by experts and critics. Within 5 years, Shakespeare penned 3 of his 5 most famous works: Macbeth *, King Lear *, and Othello *. He also produced mediocre works like Timon of Athens and All's Well That Ends Well. Both are ranked as 2 of his worst plays and are heavily criticized for their unpolished language, incomplete plots, and underdeveloped characters. In every field, even the most renowned creators often produce a large number of products that appear technically good, but are not highly valued by experts and customers. When the London Symphony Orchestra selected the 50 greatest classical music works, it included 6 by Mozart, 5 by Beethoven, and 3 by Bach. To create their very few masterpieces, Mozart composed over 600 works before his death at age 35. Beethoven composed 650 works throughout his life, and Bach wrote over 1,000. In a study of over 15,000 classical music pieces, the more works a composer wrote within a 5-year period, the higher their chance of creating successful works. Picasso's artistic career included over 1,800 paintings, 1,200 sculptures, 2,800 ceramic pieces, and 12,000 drawings, not counting prints, tapestries, and embroideries, yet only a small fraction of these received public acclaim. In poetry, when we read Maya Angelou's classic poem, Still I Rise, we tend to forget that she wrote 165 other poems. We remember the moving memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, but pay little attention to her 6 other autobiographies. In science, Einstein wrote the sketches of general and special relativity that transformed physics, but many of his 248 published works had very little impact. Ira Glass, producer of This American Life and the podcast serial Asterisk, said, "If you want to be original, the most important thing is to produce a lot of work. Generate a massive volume of work." Across fields, Simonton also stated that the most prolific individuals are not only the most original, but also produce their most original works during periods of greatest quantity. In his 30s and 35s, Edison pioneered the invention of the light bulb, phonograph, and carbon telephone. But during that time, he filed over 100 patents for various other inventions, such as the electric stencil pen, fruit preservation techniques, the use of magnets for iron ore mining, and the design of terrifying talking dolls. The periods producing the smallest products were also the periods producing the greatest works. Simonton noted that despite having over 1,093 patents, the number of Edison's achievements considered most creative can probably be counted on one's fingers. Suppose there's a balance between quantity and quality. If you want to create a better product, you have to do less. But this turns out to be wrong. In reality, when it comes to generating ideas, quantity is the best predictor of quality. Robert Sutton, a professor at Stanford University, notes, "Original thinkers will come up with many strange ideas, dead ends, and complete failures. But these costs are well worth it because they generate a large number of ideas, especially novel ones." Many people fail to achieve originality because they generate too few ideas and then obsess over perfecting them. At Upworthy, a company specializing in making quality content go viral, 2 different employees wrote headlines for a video about monkeys' reactions to unequal rewards, cucumber versus grape. 8,000 people watched the video with the headline, "Remember Planet of the Apes?" It's closer to reality than you think. But the other person's headline attracted nearly 500,000 viewers, 59 times more than the first. It was, "Monkeys were paid unequally. See what happens." Upworthy's rule is to come up with at least 25 headline ideas to find the best one. Previous research suggested that talented people sometimes come up with new ideas earlier in the creative process. But for most of us, the first ideas are usually conventional ones based on existing defaults. The Upworthy team wrote, "Once you start to despair, you'll think differently. Idea number 24 is still nothing, but idea number 25 will be a gift from the headline gods and will make you a legend." When working on the Segway, Dean Kamen recognized his blind variations as markers of creative progress. With over 440 patents to his name, he experienced many failures as well as successes. He often shared, "To find the prince of your life, you'll have to kiss a lot of frogs." In fact, the frog story was one of his mantras. He encouraged his engineers to try many different options to increase the chance of finding the right one. But he proceeded with execution before considering ideas for other modes of transportation, losing sight of the reality that inventors must necessarily struggle vigorously to evaluate their creations. Finally, the frog or the prince. The best way to evaluate ideas more accurately is to gather feedback, share ideas, and see which ones are praised and accepted by target customers. After decades of producing comedy, The Daily Show co-creator Liz Winstead still didn't know what would make an audience laugh. She recalled how desperately she tried to find jokes, write them down, and perform them on stage. Some only generated a slight murmur from the audience, while others received resounding applause. Now, with the support of social media, she has access to a faster feedback mechanism. When she comes up with a joke, she posts it on Twitter. When she writes a longer story, she posts it on Facebook. When she receives at least 25 responses on Twitter in less than a minute or a large number of shares on Facebook, she saves those ideas. At the end of the day, she develops the posts that previously received the most reader recognition. Winstead shared, "Twitter and Facebook have helped me immensely in knowing what people care about." When developing the Segway, Dean Kamen did not use this type of feedback because he was overly concerned that others would steal his idea or that basic information would be released too early. He maintained strict secrecy. Many employees were not allowed access to the Segway design and development area. Only a select group of potential investors had the opportunity to learn about it. When building the vehicle, his team generated many ideas but lacked customer evaluations to make the best choices for the final product. A device had to pass 3 or 4 iterative testing steps before reaching customers. Blind faith in ideas is extremely dangerous because it not only makes us prone to false positives, but also prevents the creation of the necessary diversity to achieve creative potential. But Kamen and his team were not the only ones overly optimistic about the Segway. Where did masters like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and John Doerr go wrong in evaluating this device? Prisoners of prototypes and myopic preferences. When the first Seinfeld script was submitted to NBC, executives didn't know how to handle it. It was truly original. Warren Littlefield, an NBC executive, said, "It was unlike any other TV show, an unprecedented script in history." In Justin Berg's study of circus performances, although circus managers were more accurate predictors than artists, they were still not truly excellent forecasters, especially regarding creative behaviors. Managers tend to be risk-averse. They focus investment costs on bad ideas rather than considering the benefits of experimenting with good ones. This can lead them to false negatives. The author of the first report on the Seinfeld pilot noted that the show was on the borderline of weak and fair. He leaned towards fair, but his boss rejected that opinion and rated it as weak. This type of false negative is common in the entertainment industry. Executives at many film studios once overlooked works that later achieved massive success, from Star Wars to E.T. to Pulp Fiction *. In publishing, managers once rejected works like The Chronicles of Narnia *, The Diary of Anne Frank *, Gone with the Wind *, Lord of the Flies *, and Harry Potter *. In 2015, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter alone grossed over $25 billion and sold more copies than any other book series. Stories of managers telling employees to stop working on projects that later achieved resounding success are documented in the annals of corporate innovation, from Nokia's LED invention to Pontiac's Vero car to Happy's electrostatic display product lines. Xbox was almost crushed at Microsoft. The Xerox Alto was almost canceled at Xerox for being too expensive and impractical. When faced with uncertainty, our first instinct is to reject new things and find reasons why they might fail. When managers review new ideas, it means they are evaluating them. To protect themselves from the risks of accepting a bad bet, they compare new concepts to successful idea prototypes from the past. When publishing executives rejected Harry Potter *, they said it was too long for a children's book. When Brandon Tartikoff watched Seinfeld *, he found it too Jewish and too New York to appeal to a large audience. Professor Eric Dane, found that the more expertise and experience people gain, the more specialized their worldview becomes. He pointed out in a study of professional card players that they struggled more than novices to adapt when the rules changed, and highly experienced accountants were often worse than newcomers at applying new tax laws. When we reach a certain level of understanding, we often become prisoners of our own prototypes. Generally, audiences are more open to new things than filmmakers. They don't have the blindness of expertise, and don't suffer as many losses when considering a model for the first time and when expressing enthusiasm for an original idea. However, in reality, Justin Berg found that test audiences did not predict the success of new ideas any better than managers. When you watch a show in your living room, you are immersed in the story. If you laugh throughout the show, it means you find it funny. However, when you watch it with a group, you don't react to the show in the same way. You are aware that you are there to evaluate it, not to experience it. So you evaluate the show from the very beginning. Because you are trying to find out if people will watch it, you naturally evaluate it against established ideas for such a show. When test audiences watched the Seinfeld pilot, they found it lacked the community feel of Cheers, the dynamic family atmosphere of The Cosby Show, and the narrative quality of Alf. Ultimately, it was too easy to find flaws in a show that didn't stand out. Warren Littlefield remarked, "The truth is, most pilot episodes are not rated fairly because test audiences don't respond positively to new or different ideas." Audiences don't have enough experience, simply because they haven't had the opportunity to see many new ideas presented in the script room before. Comedian Paul Reiser said, "The Seinfeld trials put an end to all discussions about testing. Please don't tell me this show will cater to 20 people in 60 people in Sherman Oaks. I've never seen any test there that yielded good results." Therefore, neither test audiences nor managers are ideal evaluators of creative ideas. They are too easily biased towards false negatives. They focus too much on reasons to reject an idea and cling to existing prototypes. We see that creators themselves struggle because they are often overly optimistic about their own ideas. But there is one group of forecasters that seems to excel: the group of creators who evaluate other creators' ideas. In Berg's study of artists' circus acts, the most accurate predictors of which videos would be liked, shared, and funded were their peers. When artists rated others' performances, they achieved twice the accuracy of managers and test audiences in predicting how frequently videos would be shared. Compared to creators, managers and test audiences were 56% and 55% more prone to false negatives when underestimating a new and superior performance, ranking it 5th or lower out of 10 shows viewed. We often talk about the wisdom of crowds, but we need to consider carefully which crowd. On average, the combined predictions of over 120 circus managers were no better than the predictions of a single circus performer. Managers and test audiences tend to stick to their preferred genre of activity and dismiss the rest. Creators are more open to different types of performances. They see the potential not only in their aerialist and ground acrobat colleagues, but also in talented puppeteers and mimes. Instead of trying to evaluate our own originality or seeking feedback from managers, we should regularly turn to our colleagues. They don't have the risk aversion of managers and test audiences. They are open to seeing potential in unusual or original abilities, which prevents them from falling into false negatives. At the same time, they don't have a significant investment in our ideas, which helps them maintain a distance to make objective evaluations and protects them against false positives. This evidence helps explain why many artists receive public acclaim but crave admiration from their peers. Comedians often say the highest badge of honor is making their colleagues laugh. Magicians love to fool audiences, but they live to outsmart their fellow magicians. The common explanation for this preference is that we strive for our colleagues' recognition. But Berg's research shows that we rely on peer evaluations because they are the most reliable. When we evaluate new ideas, we can better avoid false negatives by thinking like creators. In a series of experiments, Berg surveyed over 1,000 adults about the success of new products on the market. Some products were based on useful ideas: a 3D projector, a natural ground simulation floor system, and an automatic bed sheet changer. Other products were less practical, such as an electrified tablecloth to prevent ants from getting into food on a picnic. The remaining products were conventional ideas with varying useful features, ranging from a portable container for steaming food in a microwave to a handle-free towel dispenser system. Berg wanted to increase the chance of people accurately ranking a novel and useful idea as promising from the outset, in contrast to conventional, preferred ideas. He randomly assigned half of the participants to think like managers, listing 3 criteria for evaluating the success of new products in 6 minutes. This group then accurately bet on novel and useful ideas 51% of the time. But the other group of participants was much more accurate. Their rate of choosing the most promising idea reached over 77%. They spent the first 6 minutes quite differently. Instead of applying a managerial mindset to evaluate ideas, they used a creative mindset by generating their own ideas. Just 6 minutes of developing original ideas made them more open to novelty, improving their ability to see potential in unusual or original things. From these findings, you might think we could improve idea selection simply by ensuring that managers have some creative experience. But in Berg's circus data, former artists who became managers did not make significantly better evaluations than conventional managers. Pure artists remain the best forecasters. Once you take on a managerial role, it's hard to avoid an evaluative mindset from infiltrating your brain, leading to false negative judgments. Berg demonstrated this in an experiment by asking people to generate product ideas and then provide a list of evaluation criteria, then measuring the success of the ideas based on feedback from actual audiences. Thinking like creators, but then putting on a managerial hat reduced the accuracy of predictions by 41%. When Berg reversed the order, creating a list of evaluation criteria first and then generating ideas, accuracy increased to 65%. If we want to increase our chances of betting on the best original ideas, we must immediately generate our own ideas before sifting through others' opinions. And this helps explain why Seinfeld saw the light of day. The double-edged sword of experience. When test audiences harshly criticized the Seinfeld pilot, Warren Littlefield said, "It was like a knife plunging into my heart. We were afraid to move forward because our show was being vehemently rejected." Although the show was given an opportunity to comedy writers, no one wanted to write the script at the time. However, Rick Ludwin, the person who ultimately made the show happen, achieved brilliant success. Ludwin later made his mark by fighting on behalf of Jay Leno against Conan O'Brien and battling to revive a show that initially garnered insufficient audience interest. But his greatest contribution to television was greenlighting the Seinfeld pilot. At that point in his career, Rick Ludwin didn't even work in the comedy department, but he had the ability to handle a variety of diverse issues. When the Seinfeld pilot failed, he immediately gave the producers another chance. He found a few empty hours in his schedule, divided them into half-hour slots, and used his own budget to order more episodes. Ludwin shared, "As far as we know, for a TV show, ours had the fewest episodes ever filmed." Jerry Seinfeld emphasized that a 6-episode show was like a slap in the face to the creators because it was too short. Yet, NBC only ordered 4 episodes. Steve Jobs said in 1982, "If you want to create creative connections, you don't need to have the same experiences as others." Working outside the comedy production department might have been Rick Ludwin's greatest advantage. Ludwin recalled, "Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld had never written a sitcom, and my department had never developed one. But we worked together pretty well because we didn't know which rules we weren't allowed to break." An outsider's perspective helped him think independently, moving away from the standard sitcom format to create something different. Most sitcoms record consecutive scenes in a 22-minute episode, whereas Seinfeld often left conflicts unresolved and incorporated up to 20 different scenes. This was truly uncomfortable if you were used to working in the sitcom world, but completely comfortable for someone who implemented different arrangements in each special. At the same time, Ludwin had the necessary experience in comedy production. As a producer in the 1970s, he wrote jokes and sold them to Bob Hope, and later produced segments for a daytime variety show. From these segments, a comedy show was conceived. He recalled the environment of comedy writers as like an imaginary baseball camp. You think you're really good until you step onto the field. You not only can't hit the ball, but you can't even see the ball. I knew we weren't baseball players, but at least we spoke the same language. This is where people with mid-level expertise in a specific field are open to radical creative ideas. Ludwin's deep experience in comedy gave him the necessary humor. His broad experience outside of sitcoms helped him avoid the blindness against alternative filmmaking methods. Instead of meticulously examining what made a sitcom a hit, he took a broader view to understand what made a comedy successful. You never know where the next big hit will come from. It could come from left field. If you think it can't happen because the producers don't have enough experience or there's no clue it's ever happened before, if you have these kinds of mental blocks, you'll miss something. One of the best things I did for myself was never to develop a primetime comedy. But I was used to unusual ideas. I could see what had and hadn't been done. The time I read the * Saturday Night Live script helped me be more open to unusual plotlines, which has now become legendary about * Seinfeld *. The unique combination of broad and deep experience is crucial for creativity. In a recent study comparing Nobel laureate scientists from 1901 to 2005 with exemplary scientists from the same period, both groups possessed strong expertise in their respective research fields. But Nobel laureates were more likely to have artistic inclinations than less successful scientists. Here are the results from a team of researchers at the University of Michigan. They found a correlation between artistic engagement and Nobel laureates compared to ordinary scientists. A representative study of thousands of American entrepreneurs and inventors also yielded similar results. Those who started businesses and contributed to patent applications had more hobbies like painting, architecture, sculpture, and literature in their free time than their colleagues. The interest in art among eminent entrepreneurs, inventors, and scientists clearly reflects their curiosity and ability. People with an open mind towards science and business also tend to be drawn to ideas and emotions expressed through images, sounds, and words. But not only a certain type of original person can be exposed to art. Art also serves, in turn, as a source of deep, internal creative originality. When Galileo announced his astonishing discoveries of mountains on the moon, his telescope was not actually powerful enough to support that finding. Instead, he recognized zigzag lines dividing the light and dark regions of the moon. Other astronomers also observed through similar telescopes, but only Galileo had the ability to appreciate the significance of the dark and light areas. Simonton said, he had the necessary experience in physics and astronomy, and also in painting. By learning a painting technique called chiaroscuro, the coordination of light and dark colors which focused on rendering light and shadow, Galileo discovered the mountain ranges while others did not. Just like scientists, entrepreneurs and inventors often discover new ideas by broadening their knowledge of art-related fields, so we can also gain liberality through our cultural and artistic abilities. Research on highly creative adults shows that they tend to move to new cities more frequently than their peers in childhood, where they were exposed to different cultures and values, encouraging flexibility and adaptability. In a recent study, a team of researchers led by strategy professor Frederick Goddard explored how a person's creativity can be influenced by the time they spend abroad. These researchers focused on the fashion industry, tracking buyer and fashion critic evaluations of the creativity of collections from hundreds of companies and fashion designers throughout the seasons of the 21st century. The researchers also studied the biographies of creative directors, tracking the international experiences of fashion icons like Giorgio Armani, Donna Karan, Karl Lagerfeld, Donatella Versace, and Vera Wang. The majority of the most creative fashion collections came from brands whose directors had the most experience living abroad. However, there were three main trends. First, the time lived abroad wasn't as important as the time worked abroad, actively participating in design overseas. The most unique collections came from directors who had worked in 2 or 3 different countries. Second, the more different the foreign culture was from their homeland, the richer the director's creativity. An American gained very little originality working in Canada compared to participating in a project in Korea or Japan. But working in many countries with different cultures was still not enough. The third and most important factor was the length of time spent working abroad. If they only stayed abroad for a short period, directors wouldn't have enough time to absorb new ideas from the foreign culture and synthesize them with their own cultural perspective. The greatest originality only appeared when directors had about 3 to 5 years of work experience abroad. Rick Ludwin's experience fits this model. He had deep experience working with various comedy sketches for over a decade. He had broad experience living in a relatively similar television environment in several foreign countries, handling diverse and specialized shows like daytime and late-night talk shows. After becoming fluent in many television languages, he saw promise where others doubted their success. When Seinfeld was approved, Ludwin continued to oversee the show for all other episodes, placing his trust in the insider scriptwriters, who were outsiders like himself before. Most of them came in late at night, and before Seinfeld*, they had almost never made a sitcom, meaning they never had problems with unusual ideas. This meant they were never troubled by unusual ideas. The perils of intuition when Steve Jobs was wrong. The first time Steve Jobs approached Segway, he declined to participate in the project. When Dean Kamen offered the opportunity to other potential investors, Jobs coveted and reclaimed the opportunity, but soon abandoned it. Jobs invited Kamen to dinner. As a journalist, Stephen Levy shared that Jobs thought the machine was as unique and appealing as a computer, and he felt he needed to be involved in the project. Steve Jobs was known for trusting his intuition rather than systematic analysis. So why was he often right in his software and hardware decisions, but wrong this time? There were 3 main factors in Jobs that made him overconfident when evaluating the Segway's potential: his lack of experience in the field he was entering, his arrogance, and his enthusiasm. The first issue was experience. While NBC executives had extensive experience in traditional sitcoms to appreciate an unorthodox breakthrough like Seinfeld*, the initial Segway investors faced the opposite problem entirely. They lacked expertise in transportation issues. Jobs specialized in digital technology. Jeff Bezos was the king of online retail, and John Doerr had made investments in software and internet companies like Sun Microsystems, Netscape, Amazon, and Google. All of them demonstrated originality in their respective fields of expertise, but being a creator in a specific field doesn't mean you'll be a brilliant forecaster in other fields. To accurately predict the success of a new idea, it's best to be a creator in the field you specialize in. New research led by Eric Dane has shown us why. Intuition is only accurate in areas where we have extensive experience. In one experiment, people observed 10 designer handbags and rated whether they were real or fake. Half of the participants had only 5 seconds to predict, forcing them to rely on intuition. The other half had 30 seconds. This amount of time allowed them to examine and analyze the bag's features. Dane's team also rated the bags based on their handbag experience. Some in the group had extensive experience, owning more than 3 handbags from famous brands like Coach or Louis Vuitton. Others had never touched any designer bag. If you pride yourself on owning several designer handbags, the less time you have to verify, the higher your accuracy. Experienced handbag owners achieved 22% higher accuracy when they had only 5 seconds to evaluate compared to 30 seconds. When you've spent years researching handbags, your intuition can beat analysis because your unconscious mind excels at pattern recognition. If you stop and take time to think, you'll easily get bogged down in seeing only the trees and not the forest, that is, only seeing the details without seeing the big picture. However, without knowledge of handbags, intuition won't help you. When working with unfamiliar products, you'll need to step back and evaluate them. Non-experts make more rational evaluations when conducting thorough analysis. When Steve Jobs had a hunch that the Segway would change the world, he was captivated by the impulsive appeal of novelty without carefully checking its utility. Teresa Amabile, a psychologist at Harvard University, one of the world's largest academic institutions for creativity, reminds us that to succeed with original things, creations need to be new, but they also need to be useful. In the digital world dominated by invisible bits and bytes, Jobs was fascinated by the possibility that the next breakthrough innovation would be in the transportation industry. The Segway was an incredible feat of engineering, giving people a strange sensation. Bill Salmon, a Harvard Business School professor who introduced Carmen to Doer, said, "It's like a magic carpet that can transform into a product, but that product doesn't create value. The customers create the value." For a group of people with no experience in transportation, there would be a lot of work to do to predict whether the Segway was truly practical. One of the few investors who actually had many concerns in this area was Aileen Lee, who later became an associate partner with Doer at Kleiner Perkins. In board meetings, Lee questioned, "How will the Segway be used? How will you lock it? Where will you store it?" She also had another practical concern: the price. Because $5,000 or $8,000 was too expensive for an average person. Looking back, she shared, "I should have stood up and said, we haven't thought rationally about this product." Another early skeptic was Randy Commissar, a former entrepreneur, senior Apple attorney, CEO of Lucas Arts Entertainment, and founding board member at TiVo. He recalled, "I thought about it as if I were sitting with entrepreneurs. I didn't think I was smarter than those guys, but I saw something different than they did. I thought they saw great technology in an incredibly novel application. When we operated the vehicle that day, it was a magical experience on a two-wheeled, self-balancing, maneuverable vehicle. My first impression was that it was a thrilling experience. Now, for some reason, I'm no longer convinced by it." When Commissar thoroughly researched the market, he realized that the Segway was unlikely to replace cars but would be an alternative for pedestrians or bicycles. He didn't see it as a typical consumer product. He explained, "If you change transportation to use this vehicle, it will be a high cost with limitations, especially for pedestrians, even if it's allowed on sidewalks." However, this issue is still being debated, and even at an affordable price, it will take many years for people to trust this product. Instead, he suggested focusing on the device's utility in golf courses, postal services, police departments, or Disney parks. You can see the balance of value and cost in those applications. This is probably their advantage, but Commissar remained cautious. "I still see them as a major behavioral change in transportation with significant costs. I haven't clearly seen how this product will improve the productivity of mail carriers or be a target for postal services under pressure from a series of union labor agreements. On golf courses, people use golf carts to get around all day. So why would they use this alternative product?" Meanwhile, Jobs was stuck on his intuition about the novelty. "If enough people see this machine, you won't need to convince people to redesign cities with it. People are smart. That redesign will happen." Nobel laureate psychologist Daniel Kahneman and expert Gary Klein explain that intuition is only reliable when experienced individuals base their judgments in a predictable environment. If you are a doctor dealing with a patient's symptoms or a firefighter rushing into a burning building, experience will make your intuition more accurate. A strong and stable connection exists between patterns you've seen before and what you see now. But if you are a stockbroker or political forecaster, past events do not reliably influence the present. Kahneman and Klein reviewed evidence showing that experience helps physicists, accountants, insurance analysts, and chess grandmasters fields with fairly consistent causal relationships. But recruiters, judges, intelligence analysts, psychiatrists, and stockbrokers do not benefit as much from experience in a rapidly changing world. Hard-won lessons can easily lead us astray. On the other hand, due to the accelerating pace of change, our environment is becoming increasingly unpredictable. This makes intuition an unreliable inner voice. For new ideas and places, increasing demands on conducting scientific analysis. If we assume Jobs didn't accumulate enough relevant experience in transportation, then why was he so confident in his intuition? This hypothesis leads us to the second factor. Success often comes with arrogance. When Steve Jobs brushed aside his concerns, he said, "It's just that you haven't realized it." Research in transportation and aviation led Commissar to realize the problem. The more successful people are in the past, the worse they perform when entering a new environment. They become overconfident and less likely to seek crucial feedback, even in an entirely different context. Jobs was one of those who fell into this trap. With a track record and history proving his opponents wrong, he didn't bother to test his intuition by gathering sufficient input from experienced innovators in this new field. And it was his intuition that continued to lead him astray when faced with Dean Kamen's presentation style. The perils of passion. When presenting the segue, Carmen spoke passionately about how developing countries like China and India build several New York-sized cities each year. Urban centers were becoming congested with traffic, posing serious environmental hazards, and the segue would help solve this problem. Aileen Lee recalled, "He was a very strong personality, a professional, experienced, and passionate when addressing this issue. He stunned us all with that idea." In a study conducted by business professor Sherry Mind of Northeastern University, over 6 angel investors made more than 3,500 evaluations of entrepreneurial pitches to decide whether to fund them. Investors filled out a survey rating whether their comments were more intuitive or analytical, evaluating the passion and enthusiasm of each entrepreneur, and finally assessing the funding potential of each startup. The results showed that the more intuitive the investors were, the more they bet on the passion entrepreneurs infused into their products. As Daniel Kahneman explains in Asterisk Thinking, Fast and Slow Asterisk, intuition operates quickly based on emotional fervor, while reason is a slower, calmer process. Intuitive investors are easily swept up in the entrepreneur's enthusiasm. Rational investors, on the other hand, focus on facts, making calmer assessments of a business's viability. Jobs' intuitive evaluation style made him susceptible to Carmen's passion and the inherent novelty of the technology field. His arrogance and inexperience in transportation made Jobs readily believe in what was actually a false positive. When evaluating the prospects of a new idea, we are often easily swayed by the enthusiasm of those who create it. According to Google CEO Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg, truly passionate people don't wear passion on their sleeves, they carry it in their fervent hearts. Passion for seeing an idea come to fruition isn't expressed through the emotions people display. The enthusiasm we convey in our words, tone, and body language is not a clue to our internal passion. It merely reflects our presentation skills and personality. For example, research shows that extroverts tend to be more expressive than introverts, meaning they display more passion. But whether we are more extroverted or introverted, fundamentally, that doesn't tell us whether we will succeed as entrepreneurs. You can love an idea and be determined to make it succeed, but still communicate it reservedly. However, this doesn't mean that passion is irrelevant to business success. A lot of evidence shows that entrepreneurs with strong passion often grow their businesses faster and more successfully. For his part, Carmen lacked the element of passion to help develop ideas from initiatives into impactful products. Instead of being engrossed in the passion of creation, early investors should have evaluated his passion for building a company and bringing successful products to market. And to do that, they shouldn't have just paid attention to what he said, but also needed to examine what he did. After studying Carmen's past, Randy Commissar concluded that he was more an impressive inventor than an entrepreneur. In the past, Carmen's most successful inventions were products that solved customer problems. In the 1970s, he came up with the idea for a portable infusion pump when his brother, also a doctor, complained that nurses had to constantly administer infusions on site when they should be automatic, and many patients crowded hospitals instead of being able to receive medication at home. In the 1980s, Carmen developed a portable kidney dialysis machine after Baxter Healthcare hired his company to dialyze diabetic patients. He excelled at creating brilliant solutions to other people's problems, not at finding the right problems to solve. With the segue, he started with a solution and then went hunting for a problem. Instead of responding to market demand, he mistakenly began with a technology-driven motivation. Although Carmen had a passion for the segue, he was not adequately prepared to make it successful. If we want to improve our idea selection skills, we shouldn't ask whether that person will succeed. We need to track how they have succeeded. Aileen Lee said, "Looking at Carmen, we saw the image of a trustworthy founder with a history of successful medical device inventions, and the people he had collaborated with were still working with him. But when it came to realizing the product, the steady execution and calculation of production costs were very important, and he lacked that experience." Bill Salmon added, "Success is not in the idea, but in the execution of those ideas. If we want to predict whether original people will successfully execute a new idea, we need to look beyond their enthusiasm when presenting the idea and focus on their enthusiasm for execution. This is expressed through action. Rick Ludwin didn't bet on Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David because initially, they seemed enthusiastic when presenting their script or even genuinely excited about the show's idea. He gave them another chance because he wanted to see how they would adjust their idea and their ability to execute those ideas correctly. They'd be in the writer's room, trying to arrange the second act at midnight. You would see how meticulous Jerry was in his work. If that's the case, that's the passion you're looking for. The corrective lens of idea selection. My personal failure with Warby Parker was due to a false negative. After reading research on idea selection, I realized one of my limitations. I was not a creator in that field, nor was I a customer. Initially, I attributed my poor creative predictions to my 20/20 vision. If you've never worn glasses, you'll have difficulty evaluating the preferences of those who do and have worn them. But through reflection, I realized what I truly lacked was breadth of experience. I had spent 2 years researching and consulting for an eye care company, whose primary revenue came from selling glasses in stores. After ophthalmologists provided prescriptions and customers came to try on frames, I was stuck in a default way of thinking about traditional buying and selling. If I had spent time brainstorming ideas before hearing others present them, or thoroughly researched online sales of clothing and accessories, perhaps I would have been more open to new ideas. The 4 founders were not hampered by this blindness. They had sufficient depth and breadth of experience. 3 of them wore glasses and had backgrounds in biotech, healthcare, consulting, and banking. One of them, Dave, lost his glasses while traveling abroad for several months without a phone. Upon returning to the US, the simultaneous need to buy a phone and glasses gave him a fresh perspective. Neil Blumenthal didn't wear glasses, but he had spent 5 years working at a nonprofit organization that trained women entrepreneurs in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The product used in teaching entrepreneurship was eyeglasses. This gave him deep knowledge of the optics industry. He knew that glasses could be manufactured, designed, and sold at a lower price. And through time spent learning about conventional eyewear channels, he gained enough breadth of experience to apply a new approach. Neil told me, originality rarely comes from insiders, especially when they are entrenched and comfortable with what the optics industry already has. Thanks to their diverse experience, the Warby Parker entrepreneurs were not hindered by existing prototypes or constrained by evaluative thinking. Instead of assuming their idea would work and immediately jumping into an enthusiastic sales model, as Carmen had done from the start, they sought extensive feedback from fellow innovators and potential customers. By cutting out retail intermediaries, they could sell a pair of glasses that retailed for $500 for $95. After an expert warned them that costs would increase and that a $500 price point was a sign of quality, they conducted a survey with fake product pages, randomly assigning different price points to customers. They found that purchase intent increased up to around $100, then stabilized and decreased at higher prices. They experimented with different website designs with friends to see what generated not just clicks but strong trust. Since other companies could sell glasses online, the founders realized that branding was crucial to their success. To name the company, they spent 6 months brainstorming ideas, creating a spreadsheet with over 2,000 potential names. They surveyed preferred names in customer surveys and focus groups and found that the inspiring name Warby Parker sounded sophisticated and original, not evoking negative associations. Then, they proceeded to pursue their passion. Much of Warby Parker's recent success comes from how they collaborate with colleagues in evaluating ideas. In 2014, they created a program called Warbles, inviting everyone in the company to submit proposals and requests for new technological features at any time. Before Warbles was introduced, they received 10 to 20 idea proposals per quarter. With the new program, this number increased to nearly 400, as employees believed the idea selection process was a talent scouting system. Among these, one proposal suggested the company needed to adjust its retail management method. Another requested a new appointment scheduling system. Warby Parker's chief technology officer, Leah Binder, said, "Neil and Dave are truly amazing, but there's no way they can be as amazing as 200 people combined." Instead of limiting idea contributions and letting managers decide which ideas were worth pursuing and implementing, Warby Parker kept proposals open and completely transparent in a Google Doc. Everyone in the company could read, comment online, and discuss them in a bi-weekly meeting. This meant, as Justin Berg advises, that ideas were not only evaluated by managers, but also by creators, who tend to be more open to entirely new ideas. The time employees spent brainstorming ideas helped them better recognize which proposals from colleagues were valuable. The technology team had full discretion to filter proposals and implement those that appealed to them. This sounds quite democratic, but there is a bias to help employees recognize which proposals are strategic for the company. Managers will vote in favor of good proposals and reject bad ones. To avoid false positives and false negatives, the votes are not binding. The technology team can override managers by choosing a proposal that didn't receive many votes and working to prove its value. Applied psychologist Jeb Blount, who conducted a study at Warby Parker, said, "They didn't wait for permission to start building something. They gathered feedback from colleagues before bringing the product to customers. They started fast and then slowed down. If the Segway had also gone through a process like Warble's, perhaps they would have received a lot of important feedback that would have helped the manufacturer create a more useful design." Before it was too late, Dean Kamen should have learned to create a more practical product or license the technology to someone more capable. Although the Segway failed, Kamen remains a brilliant inventor. Jeff Bezos is still a visionary entrepreneur, and John Doerr is still a wise investor. Whether you are creating or evaluating new ideas, the best thing you can do is measure success on the scale that athletes use in baseball. As Randy Commissar puts it, "If my batting average is over .300 in a season, I'm a genius. The future is unpredictable. The sooner you know this, the better you will become." Dean Kamen has gone on to announce a series of new inventions in healthcare, where he made his initial mark. A prosthetic arm with advanced robotic technology helps amputees hold grapes or operate a hand drill, named Luke after a scene in * Star Wars where Skywalker receives a bionic arm. There is a quiet, fuel-efficient machine that can generate electricity and boil water. It's the Slingshot water purifier, which can distill drinking water from any source, without filters, and can use fuel made from cow dung. Kamen went back to basics when he presented the Slingshot idea to Commissar. But once again, the skeptical Commissar, who had backpacked through developing countries, thought the machine was too complicated to install in areas that only needed simplicity. When the machine stopped working, it would become a pile of junk. Whether Commissar's predictions are right or wrong, we still see the negative aspects of Kamen's invention. As an inventor, Kamen should continue to blindly generate new ideas and gather more feedback from fellow creators to refine his vision of which ideas might prove useful. As an investor, you might see things more clearly, but you need to play the odds rather than trusting a single idea. You should wisely put your faith in all of Kamen's creations. In 2013 alone, the United States had over 300,000 new patents. The chance of any of these inventions changing the world is very small. Individual creators have good prospects throughout the idea's life cycle. When evaluating someone's great creation, we don't focus on their average, but on their peak. Part 3. Taking risks to speak truth to power. In the early 1990s, an ambitious CIA analyst, Carmen Medina, was sent to Western Europe for a 3-year assignment. Upon returning to the United States, she realized that leaving the country had helped her rebuild her career. After taking a job that didn't align with her skills and aspirations, she found another way to contribute to the community, joining groups active in the future of intelligence. Throughout her career at the CIA, Medina recognized a fundamental communication problem in the intelligence community. The default information sharing system, through finished intelligence reports released once a day, was difficult to coordinate across intelligence agencies. Analysts had no way to timely share critical insights as they emerged through reports. Because information was constantly evolving, it took a long time for crucial information to reach the right people. To ensure peace of mind and national security, every moment became critical. Each intelligence agency needed to effectively create its own daily news bulletin. And Medina saw the need for a significantly different system that allowed for instant updates of intelligence to be shared immediately across units. To break down negative interdepartmental barriers and increase communication speed, she made a highly countercultural proposal. Instead of printing reports on paper, intelligence agencies should update their findings in real time and disseminate them on Intelink, an internal classified network shared among intelligence agencies. Medina's colleagues quickly and bluntly rejected her proposal. No plan like Medina's had ever been tried before. Their argument was that the internet was a threat to national security. Intelligence was a secret operation aimed at good. With the current system, they ensured printed documents reached designated recipients. Electronic communication, on the other hand, seemed unsafe in that way. If information fell into the wrong hands, all of us would be in danger. Medina refused to back down. If the ultimate goal of these agencies was a better future and she couldn't defend the truth to them, where could she? Witnessing the fax machine's ability to share information more effectively, she became convinced that the digital revolution would eventually shake up the intelligence world. She continued to advocate for an internet platform that would allow the CIA to transmit intelligence back and forth with other agencies like the FBI and NSA. Medina adamantly expressed her opinion, but no one listened. A senior colleague warned her, "Be careful what you're saying to these groups. If you're too honest and say what you're really thinking, it will ruin your career." Not long after, even her good friends started to distance themselves from her. Finally, frustrated by the disrespect she received, Medina became so angry and shouted so much that it made her ill for 3 days, and she then started looking for a new job. When she couldn't find work elsewhere, she quit her position, where she couldn't stand up for action. It was nothing more than a job at an intelligence agency. She was quiet for a while, but 3 years later, she decided to speak up again in support of an online system for continuous and real-time reporting among U.S. intelligence offices. Less than a decade later, Carmen Medina played an indispensable role in creating a platform called Intellipedia, an internal Wikipedia that allowed intelligence agencies to access each other's data systems. This was completely at odds with CIA standards. In the words of one observer, it was like asking for vegetarianism to be popularized in Texas. By 2008, Intellipedia became a crucial data resource used by intelligence agencies to address major challenges like securing the Beijing Olympic Games and identifying the terrorists behind the Mumbai attacks. Within a few years, the website boasted over 500,000 subscribers in the intelligence community, more than 1 million pages, and 630 million views, and was awarded the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal. A senior leader stated, "It's hard to overstate what they accomplished. They made a massive change in an instant without spending a dime, while other programs failed to achieve these results with millions of dollars in funding." So why did Medina fail in her first attempt to present her idea, and what helped her be heard the second time? In that intervening period, the world had changed. The internet was widely accepted, and the September 11th terrorist attacks sounded an alarm, forcing intelligence agencies to consider better collaboration. But they had no online solutions until Medina became the deputy director of the CIA, which gave her the authority to revive Intellipedia. To get that position, she had to learn to communicate differently, to speak up and challenge, earning people's trust instead of losing it. On one hand, we are all hesitant to express a minority opinion, oppose a policy that makes no sense, fight for a new way of working, or stand with a disadvantaged community. This chapter will discuss when we need to express our views and how we can speak up effectively without risking our careers and relationships. When is the best time to speak up, and what steps do we need to take for our opinions to be heard by others? Along with decoding Carmen Medina's discoveries, you will learn from an entrepreneur who convinced investors to fund his company and from a manager who took on Steve Jobs' work. You will find out why the most supportive managers sometimes provide the least support, how gender and race affect their voices, and why the photos we like are the opposite of what our friends love. The goal is to explain how all of us can minimize the risks of speaking up on any issue and reap the potential benefits of doing so. Power without status **. Leaders and managers appreciate employees who proactively take initiative, build networks, gather new knowledge, and seek feedback. However, one type of initiative is often punished: speaking up to superiors. In a study across manufacturing, service, retail, and nonprofit sectors, the more frequently employees raised ideas and concerns to their superiors, the less likely they were to receive raises and promotions over a 2-year period. In one experiment, when individuals spoke out against racism, they were criticized by those who saw it as wrong but didn't dare to speak up themselves. The higher we climb the moral ladder, the more isolated we become. To understand the barriers Carmen Medina faced, we need to distinguish between two fundamental aspects of social hierarchy that often go hand in hand: power and status. Power relates to controlling or commanding others. Status is being respected and admired. In an experiment led by Professor Allison Fragile of the University of North Carolina, people were punished for trying to exert power without status. When people tried to influence others but lacked respect from them, they were perceived as unpleasant, coercive, and self-serving. Because they hadn't earned our admiration, they had no right to tell us what to do, and we resisted them. This is exactly what happened to Carmen Medina. Her years abroad diminished her standing. She didn't have the opportunity to prove her value to her colleagues, so they placed no trust in her ideas. When people dismissed her concerns, she felt utterly frustrated. When we try to influence others and realize they don't respect us, it creates a vicious cycle of continuous resentment. In an attempt to assert our power, we respond by resorting to increasingly disrespectful behaviors. The most shocking manifestations of this cycle occurred when researchers asked people to work in pairs and instructed the person given power to make the other person perform certain tasks to earn a $50 bonus. When those randomly assigned power knew that their colleague admired and respected them, most chose very reasonable tasks to earn the $50 bonus. Their colleague might have to tell a joke or write about their experiences from the previous day. Conversely, if the person holding power knew their colleague looked down on them, they would retaliate by making a deliberately humiliating request. For example, telling their colleague to bark like a dog 3 times and say, "I'm dirty," 5 times, or count backward from 500 in increments of 7. Just perceiving a lack of respect, the person holding power nearly doubled their chances of humiliating the other person. Carmen Medina didn't go that far, but as she continued to speak up, her attempts to exert influence without status created increasingly negative reactions against her. Status cannot be demanded or requested. It must be earned or acknowledged. In her second attempt years later, Medina did not risk her career trying to shake up the system from a subordinate position. Instead, she aimed to consolidate her status by becoming part of the system to change it from within. As iconic filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola remarked, "The way to approach power is not always simply to challenge the ruling class, but first to establish yourself, then confront and persuade that ruling class." When Medina made the risky choice to present her idea again, she tried to limit the risks she would face by applying for a job in information security. Her main role was to ensure the database system was secure. She recalled, "That was unusual for me. I never did that. This was indeed very conservative. Ensuring the security of our reports didn't excite me at all, but I eventually found a gentler way to make what I wanted a reality." Getting to the root of responsibility meant exploring digital communication options for things we always tried to keep safe. I was always that conservative. It was a balanced risk portfolio. Previously, her case for sharing information via the internet was viewed as a security threat, but now she could frame it as part of her mission to protect data security. People saw me there representing something, not opposing the status quo. I thought that if I proved myself in that position, it would be an opportunity to start planting the seeds for even greater changes. As Medina gained respect for her efforts, she accumulated what psychologist Edwin Hollander called idiosyncrasy credits, the leeway to deviate from group expectations. Idiosyncrasy credits are earned through respect, not rank or social status. They are based on contributions to the organization. We suppress low-status individuals who try to challenge the status quo but tolerate and even celebrate the eccentricities of high-status stars. In a recent experiment by Silvia Bellezza, people rated male professors at top universities with higher status and authority 14% more highly when they wore t-shirts, and had beards compared to professors who wore ties and were cleanly shaven. Most professors dress formally and refuse to conform to norms that are too costly. These individuals succeeded in earning credibility through subtle signals of their unique style. After Carmen Medina took the security job, she spent the next several years making great strides in the digital realm. By working to advance the CIA's mission, she built idiosyncrasy credits to fight for her vision of knowledge sharing, which led to her promotion to an executive position. In 2005, Sean Denny and Don Burge, two CIA analysts from different agency departments, joined forces to create Intellipedia, an intelligence version of Wikipedia. Many managers were skeptical about the value of a wiki for cross-agency information sharing. Dendy admitted, "Trying to implement these tools in the intelligence community is basically like telling your parents they raised you wrong." They were rejected at every stage until they met Carmen Medina, who had quietly built a network of dissenters within the CIA. She supported them with the necessary senior leadership for their nascent efforts, ensuring space for them to introduce open-source concepts to a culture built on secrecy. Since Medina held power, she no longer had to worry about how to articulate her ideas. But on that journey to gain the status that brought her power, she had to change how she spoke up. Her shift in strategy also shared commonalities with the most unusual startup pitch you've ever seen. Lead with your limitations, the Sarek effect. After welcoming their first child, Rufus Griscom and Alissa Volkman were horrified by the amount of misleading advertising and bad advice offered about parenting. So they started an online magazine and blog network called Babel to challenge the clichés that dominated parents and address truly difficult issues with humor. In 2009, when Griscom presented Babel to venture capitalists, he did the opposite of what businesses were doing. He presented a list of the top 5 reasons why investors shouldn't put money into his business. This would probably have ended his current job. Investors were looking for reasons to say yes, and here he was providing a list of reasons to say no. Entrepreneurs have a duty to highlight their company's strengths, not its weaknesses, but his unconventional approach worked. That year, Babel raised $3.3 million in funding. 2 years later, Griscom made a business visit to Disney to see if Disney was interested in acquiring Babel. In this pitch, he couldn't again present weaknesses to achieve his goal, because doing so would imply that your startup is having problems, even if you promise to fix them. But when you're trying to sell an established company, you have every motivation to emphasize that every difficult period is a path to brighter days. Strangely, however, Griscom did it again. On one of his presentation slides, he wrote, "Here's why you shouldn't buy Babel." When presenting his work to Disney's digital division, he explained that user engagement was at least below 3 views per visit, lower than expected. Babel was supposed to be a website for parents, but 40% of the articles were about celebrities, and the failure was once again a wake-up call to redesign their website. Disney ended up acquiring Babel for $40 million. This is known as the Sarek effect, named after social scientist Leslie Sarek. In both situations, Griscom presented his ideas to people with more power than him and tried to persuade them to invest. Most of us assume that to be persuasive, we must emphasize our strengths and minimize our weaknesses. That kind of strong communication makes sense if it receives audience support. But when you're expressing a novel idea or speaking up for a suggested change, the audience will typically be skeptical. Investors will look for flaws in your argument. Managers will hunt for reasons why your proposal won't work. In these cases, there are at least 4 reasons why Griscom's low-power communication style was effective. The first advantage is that presenting weaknesses up front can dispel audience skepticism. Marketing professors Marnie Freistat and Peter Wright found that when we perceive someone trying to persuade us, we naturally raise our mental shields. The persuader's overconfidence is a red flag, a necessary signal to help us guard against influence. In the early days, when Griscom presented Babel at the first 2 board meetings, he talked about things that were going right for a business, hoping to excite the board about the company's momentum and potential. "Every time I tried to emphasize the superficial highlights, I'd get a skeptical reaction," he recalled. Uncontrolled optimism is like salesmanship. It somehow looks dishonest, and as a result, I got skeptical attitudes back. Everyone is allergic to that feeling or being suspected of being involved in a sales pitch. In the third deal, Griscom reversed his approach. He candidly discussed all the company's mistakes and the things that kept him up at night. Although this tactic might be familiar in a debate, it was very novel for an entrepreneur, and the board members reacted more positively than in the previous meeting, shifting their attention from a defensive posture to problem-solving. Griscom decided to try similar methods with investors and found similar reactions. They were no longer guarded. When I presented on the slide that these are the reasons why you shouldn't acquire this company, the first reaction was laughter. Then you could see their bodies relax. That's sincerity. They couldn't smell, feel, or see anything like salesmanship anymore. This wasn't a trivial sale. In her initial attempts to speak up, Carmen Medina failed by not acknowledging the limitations of her idea. She declared it as a truth that the intelligence community needed to share information more openly, making a risky argument that only emphasized the benefits of transparency. A friend confided, "Carmen, you talk as if you won't be happy until everyone accepts these things as truth." In her second attempt to present her views, years later, she adopted a more balanced approach in her presentations, expressing a little doubt by saying, "Perhaps I was wrong." After Medina was promoted to a leadership position, she saw herself reflected when attending debates. If people only present the advantages of ideas and quickly conclude that the idea has too many flaws, they haven't really thought it through. They tried to doctor their slides to prevent me from seeing the flaws. When people present limitations or disadvantages, I immediately become an ally. Instead of selling me an idea, they presented me with a problem they needed help solving. Along with changing interaction systems, honestly acknowledging mistakes will change user evaluations. In a fascinating experiment, Teresa Amabile asked people to rate the intelligence and expertise of readers who shared their feelings about books. She wondered if adjusting the tone of the review would change readers' perceptions of the critics. She used book reviews published in the New York Times and edited them so their content was quite similar, with only the tone being either laudatory or scathing. Half of the participants were randomly assigned to read a positive review. In 128 inspiring pages of his debut novel, Alvin Harding has proven himself a capable young American author. A Longer Dawn is a fine novella or a prose poem, depending on your aesthetic. Its power is profound. It touches on the very basics: life, love, death, and everything rushes headlong, bringing Alvin's pen to new heights on every page. Another version offered a harsher review, where Amabile kept the language intact but replaced some complimentary adjectives with disparaging ones. In 128 tedious pages of his debut novel, Alvin Harding proves himself nothing more than an utterly incapable young American author. A Longer Dawn is a prose poem, if you'd like to call it that, without any significant impact. It touches on the very basics: life, love, death, but at such a rudimentary level that it only achieves the depth of a mediocre pen on every page. In the two versions above, which version was rated more highly by readers? They had to be fair. The quality of the work in the reviewer's eyes was unchanged. The vocabulary was comparable, and so was the grammatical structure. It took equal skill to write both versions. But people rated the reviewers of the critical version as 14% more intelligent and 16% more discerning in literary judgment than those who rated the complimentary version. We assume that an amateur can make an artistic judgment, but to critique a work, they need to reach a professional level. Just changing a few words from inspiring to tedious, from capable to incapable, from profound impact to no significant impact, from rushes headlong to rudimentary level, and from new heights to depth of a mediocre pen, was effective enough for the critical reviewers to be seen as more intelligent. Amabile wrote, "Pessimistic prophets appear wise and insightful, while those who deliver positive messages are seen as naive Pollyannas." This is the second benefit of leading with the limitations of an idea. It makes you appear intelligent. Rufus Griscom discovered this early in his career, which originated in publishing. "There's nothing more embarrassing than writing an entirely positive review," he commented. Even if reviewers loved the book, they felt obliged to add a concluding paragraph to complete it. According to Griscom's philosophy, I am not an inert log. I am not completely frozen by this author. I have my own perceptions. When he presented Babel's problems to investors, he demonstrated that he wasn't frozen by his own ideas or trying to freeze them. He was a sharp judge of his own shortcomings. He was smart enough to address the missing work and anticipate problems that investors might see. The third benefit of confronting the downsides of your ideas head-on is that it makes you more trustworthy. When Rufus Griscom described the obstacles he faced in his business, he showed not only knowledge, but also honesty and humility. Of course, the most obvious weaknesses can backfire if the audience doesn't recognize them. It could be ammunition for them to shoot down your idea. But Griscom's audience was naturally skeptical and wanted to understand the problems during the feasibility study. Investors' job is to find the company's flaws. By letting them know the shortcomings of the business model, I build trust with them, Griscom explained. And frankly, articulating the weaknesses of the business made him more trustworthy than if he had only talked about the strengths. You need confidence to be humble, to confront your weaknesses, Griscom said. If I'm willing to let investors know the flaws in my business, they'll think it's terrible if that's true. Disney trusted Griscom so much that after acquiring Babbel, they put him on the board to launch business projects for 2 years as vice president and general manager, where he played a key role in developing Disney Interactive's digital strategy. The Sarek effect returned. The fourth advantage of this approach is that it makes it easier for the audience to evaluate the idea themselves, because we can have bias in how we process information. To demonstrate this bias, I often ask executives to rate how happy they are after thinking about the positive aspects of their lives. One group is assigned to write down 3 good things in their lives. Another group has to list 12 good things. Everyone assumes the group that writes 12 happy things will feel happier. The more blessings you list, the better you feel about your circumstances. But almost the opposite is true. We are happier when we list only 3 good things instead of 12. Why is that? Psychologist Norbert Schwarz points out that the more we think about something, the more common and important we consider it to be. There's one thing that seems certain for executives when they list 3 good things about their lives. They immediately list their love for their children, spouse, and work. Because these are the things that generate positivity, they assume their lives are pretty good. It's difficult to come up with 12 good things about their lives. After family and work, executives usually mention friends, and when asked, they will name each one. After struggling to come up with a dozen good things, they conclude that their lives are not good at all. This is what happened to investors when Rufus Griscom cited Babbel's weaknesses. By acknowledging his most serious problems, he made it difficult for investors to think of anything else that had gone wrong with his company. And when they no longer perceived other concerns, they decided that Babbel's problems weren't really that serious. Griscom noticed this in the first Babbel board meeting when he first tried his approach of presenting his weaknesses. When I cited factors that could kill my company, the board's reaction was completely opposite. Oh, these things aren't too bad. Newton's third law might also apply to human motivation. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. But ironically, presenting disadvantages can make it harder for the audience to think and voice their own opinions correctly compared to seeing advantages. Familiarity breeds liking. Look at the list of familiar songs below. Choose one of them and tap its rhythm on your hand. Happy Birthday, Mary Had a Little Lamb, Jingle Bells, Rock Around the Clock, Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star, Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Now, how many of your friends do you think would recognize the song you're tapping? I've conducted this experiment for years with leaders and students. While educational, it's also a lot of fun at dinner parties. What's your guess? If you said no one recognized the song you were tapping, you need to reevaluate your tapping skills, or you're seriously doubting your friend's listening ability. In the original study at Stanford University, people thought it would be quite easy for listeners to guess the song title after they tapped the rhythm. They predicted that their friends would achieve a 50% accuracy rate in naming the song. But when they proceeded to tap the songs, only 2.5% actually guessed the correct song. Out of 120 tapped songs, people expected 60 to be recognized. But in reality, only 3 were recognized. I've received similar results in many other organizations. At a senior leadership event for J.P. Morgan Chase, CEO Jamie Dimon predicted that the executive sitting next to him had a 100% chance of guessing correctly. He was right, but almost always, we are overconfident in our predictions. Why is that? Often, we can't tap the rhythm of a song without hearing the melody in our heads. This makes it impossible for us to imagine that the rhythm we're tapping sounds like disconnected noises to a listener who isn't hearing the accompanying melody, as Chip and Dan Heath wrote in their book Made to Stick. Listeners can't hear the melody. What they can hear is a series of disconnected noises, like a strange Morse code. This is the main challenge when communicating a novel idea. When you present a new proposal, you're not just hearing the melody in your mind. You've been writing a song. You've spent hours, days, weeks, months, or even years thinking about the idea. You've anticipated problems, built solutions, and revisited the vision. You know the lyrics and melody of the idea in your head. By that point, you can no longer imagine what the song would sound like to an audience hearing it for the first time. This explains why we rarely communicate our ideas openly. They are so familiar to us that it makes us underestimate how much exposure the audience needs to understand and fully trust them. When Harvard University professor John Cotter studied organizations that embraced change years ago, he found that they often underestimated the amount of communication required to convey their vision by a factor of 10. Generally, they spoke about their direction for change 10 times less than what stakeholders needed to hear. Over a 3-month period, employees might encounter 2 million words, and the average number of words conveying the vision for change during that time was only 13,400. This could include a 30-minute speech, a multi-hour meeting, a press conference, and a memo. Since over 99% of the communication employees encountered during those 3 months was unrelated to the new idea, how could they be expected to understand it? Could they automatically grasp the idea? Those who held the change idea didn't realize this because they only focused on listening to issues related to their vision. If we want people to accept our original ideas, we need to speak up, then repeat. To illustrate this, which of the following words do you prefer? Iktitaf or Sarek? If you're like most people, you'll choose Sarek over Iktitaf, but actually the issue isn't in the words themselves. The eminent psychologist Robert Zajonc called this the mere exposure effect. The more often we encounter something, the more we like it. When he first showed people meaningless words like Iktitaf and Sarek, the two test words were equally appealing. But when Zajonc presented one of them twice in a comparative test, people grew to like the word presented more often, and the degree of liking increased further after 5, 10, and 25 exposures. To increase your liking for the word, Sarek, I used it 5 times in previous sections before talking about Rufus Griscom. There is no such thing as the Sarek effect, and there is no social scientist named Leslie Sarek. I made it up to demonstrate the mere exposure effect. Rufus Griscom is a real person, just like the others named in this book. The mere exposure effect is amplified many times. The more familiar we become with a face, a character, a number, a sound, a smell, a brand, or a Chinese character, the more we like it. This is true across cultures and different species. Even chicks prefer familiarity. My favorite preference test is when people look at pictures of themselves and their friends. Whether normal or reversed, we like our friends' regular photos because that's how we usually see them. But we also prefer to see reversed images of ourselves as we see ourselves in a mirror. Entrepreneur Howard Tannenbaum said, "Familiarity breeds liking, it brings comfort." One explanation for this effect is that frequent exposure makes processing easier. A novel idea requires more effort for us to fully understand. The more we see it, hear it, and interact with it, the more comfortable, attached, and less threatened we feel. Just as film can be damaged if left too long in the sun, and songs heard too often stick in our heads, overly familiar ideas can lead to boredom. Generally, evidence suggests that liking continues to increase when we are exposed to an idea 10 to 20 times. And even more exposures can still be useful for more complex ideas. Interestingly, exposure is more effective when ideas are still weak and mixed with other ideas to maintain audience curiosity. It's best to have a delay between presenting ideas and evaluating them to give stakeholders time to absorb them. If you make a proposal to your boss, you might start with a brief, to-the-point presentation of just 30 seconds during a Tuesday conversation, reiterate it on Wednesday, and then ask for feedback at the end of the week. When Carmen Medina became Deputy Director of U.S. Intelligence, she knew that for intelligence analysts to share information more openly, she needed to consistently expose them to her ideas. So she started writing a blog on the classified internal network, modeling the information transparency she was advocating. Twice a week, she wrote short commentaries expressing her views on the necessity of sharing information, reducing secrecy, and asserting that this would be the wave of the future. Initially, many leaders pondered and dismissed this view. Exposure attending keynote presentations interspersed with other forms of communication, and reflecting further on the ideas during the delays between them made leaders more attentive to Medina's ideas. Not long after, CI tech experts developed a platform on the internal network allowing employees to set up their own blogs. And this spread. People began to trust her because she had given them the courage to start blogs. Thanks in no small part to her efforts, the intelligence community achieved a vibrant blogosphere where knowledge was formally shared by analysts from different agencies. To quit before you're fired. When I first learned Carmen Medina's story, I wondered why she kept choosing to speak up after it had derailed her career. Building on a classic book by economist Albert Hirschman, there are 4 different options for dealing with an unsatisfactory situation. Whether you are unhappy with your job, marriage, or government, decades of research indicate that you can choose between exit, voice, loyalty, and neglect. Exit means removing yourself entirely from something, quitting a miserable job, ending a bad marriage, or leaving an oppressive country. Voice refers to actively trying to improve the situation, approaching your boss with ideas to make work better, encouraging your spouse to seek counseling, or becoming a political activist to elect a less corrupt government. Loyalty means enduring through thick and thin. Continuing to work hard even if your job is stifling, staying committed to your partner, or supporting the government even if you disagree with its decisions. Neglect means maintaining the current situation, but gradually reducing your efforts. Just doing enough to avoid being fired, picking up new hobbies to distance yourself from your partner, or refusing to vote. Fundamentally, these choices are based on feelings of control and commitment. Do you believe you can bring about change, and then do you care enough to try? If you believe you are stuck with the status quo, you will choose neglect and disengagement, yet still try to continue with the situation. If you feel you can make a difference but aren't committed to any specific person, country, or organization, you will leave. Only if you believe your actions matter and care deeply about the issue will you consider using your voice. After Carmen Medina remained silent in her initial attempt to voice her idea, she no longer believed she could make a difference. She wasn't the type to shirk responsibility, but one of her commitments was broken. I was like a refugee on a boat somewhere between neglect and loyalty. Even years later, she didn't want to revisit the feeling of how speaking up had destroyed her career. I was very hesitant to go back there. I wasn't sure enough time had passed. She recalled, reflecting on it, "Do you know what made me crazy enough to do it again? Because I was working for Mike, the best boss I had ever collaborated with in my career." In the workplace, our sense of commitment and control depends more on our direct manager than anyone else. When working with a supportive superior, our relationship with the organization is strengthened, and we feel more influential. When I think of this boss as the person who gave Medina the confidence to speak up again, I imagine a very pleasant, warm, trusting, and collaborative person. So I was surprised when Medina described Mike as a skeptical and shrewd individual. The portrait she painted of her boss fit the image of a more demanding manager, someone who is often skeptical and critical of others. Difficult managers are often the last people we seek out when we are in a precarious situation, but sometimes they are our strongest supporters. Many of us love approval and hate conflict, wanting to please others and protect harmony, which makes us retreat instead of engaging. Because agreeable people always prioritize cooperation and conformity, they are not inclined to create animosity and disrupt interpersonal relationships, wrote management researchers Jeff Lapine and Lynn Vincent after studying speaking up. Often, prickly people are those who feel more comfortable openly expressing views against others and against convention. In a study led by psychologist Stephen Coate, adults filled out a personality survey measuring their tendencies toward agreeableness and disagreeableness. Over the next 3 weeks, 6 times a day, they reported what they did and how they felt. Agreeable people were happiest in moments when they gave praise and compliments, laughed with others, expressed affection, reassured others, compromised, or conceded to please others. Conversely, Disagreeable people experience the greatest joy when criticizing, confronting, or challenging others. In decisions to speak up, the audience we choose also has as many issues as the way we convey our message. When we speak to agreeable audiences, their instinct is to nod and smile. In an attempt to reconcile and avoid conflict, they often hesitate to provide important feedback. Disagreeable managers often lean in more to challenge us, helping us improve our ability to articulate more effectively. Many people can be skeptical, as long as it doesn't go too far, Medina noted. I don't think my boss Mike ever fully believed this was the way an organization should approach things, but he respected diversity of thought, even if he didn't necessarily agree, and we often disagreed on many things, but I felt I could be honest with him, and he would give me enough rope, but he would actually stop me before I hung myself. Instead of talking to agreeable audiences, it's better to target your ideas to people with a history of originality. Research shows that when managers have a history of challenging the status quo, they tend to be more open to new ideas and feel less threatened by opinions from others. They care more about creating a better organization than protecting their own position. They are motivated by the organization's mission, meaning they won't be so loyal and compliant that they overlook its shortcomings. Medina said, Mike loved his organization, but he was willing to criticize it. He wept when he spoke about the mission. He was very tolerant of incongruity, eccentricity, compared to many other managers in the organization. With the support of a tough boss whose top priority was strengthening the CIA, Medina regained her sense of control and commitment. Knowing that her boss would let her pursue her idea, she was ready to continue her efforts to promote more open information sharing. When promoted at the CIA, Medina found that her colleagues were more receptive to her proposals, even though they were mid-level managers who had previously opposed them. Social scientists have long demonstrated the agreeableness effect from these mid-level individuals. If you are in a senior position, you are expected to be different from them and therefore have the right to take a different direction. Similarly, if you are still at the bottom of a status hierarchy, you have nothing to lose and can gain everything through your originality. The middle of the hierarchy, where most of us are, is dominated by insecurity. At that point, you gain a little respect. You have value in your group and don't want your position to be threatened. To maintain and potentially gain status later, you play the game of closely following the leader enough to prove your worth as a team member. As sociologist George Hammonds observed, the conservatism of the mid-status group reflects the anxiety of a person who desires social status but fears being stripped of all authority. Falling from low to even lower is almost painless, but falling from mid-level to the bottom is devastating. Not long ago, I was asked to interview Google CEO Larry Page on stage. At dinner the night before the event, I asked him why he and Sergey Brin had hesitated to drop out of graduate school and commit full-time to Google so early. His answer focused on their career stage. If they presented themselves as academic superstars, they might have dedicated themselves to Google without fear of loss. Earlier in their careers, when they had no status, they were entirely willing to take risks. Page kept busy in college, working on a solar-powered car and building a printer out of Lego bricks. But if they could have made significant progress with their PhD programs, they would have had much to lose by abandoning that work. The influence of mid-level status leads us to choose safety in what has been proven right, rather than embracing the risks of originality. Sociologist Damon Phillips of Columbia University and Ezra Zuckerman of MIT pointed out that security analysts were significantly less likely to issue negative stock ratings when they or the banks that employed them were in mid-level positions. Issuing a sell recommendation could anger company executives and investors who valued the stock. Analysts with poor track records at small banks had no room to fear failure when taking these risks, and prominent analysts at large banks had a safety net. But for analysts with moderate success at mid-tier banks who were trying to advance themselves, an ineffective proposal could be a career-limiting step. When Carmen Medina was promoted, she learned that speaking up would now have a greater impact, either lifting ideas up or bringing them down, and spent less time trying to reach mid-level managers. But senior leaders saw her as one of the rare employees who believed something was wrong with the agencies and also believed it could be changed. Her credibility continued to be reinforced by the young colleagues who followed her. When she shared her views with emerging employees at the CIA, they were very excited by this vision and deeply respected her. Younger employees valued new ideas and saw her as a role model for how difficult it would be if she wasn't heard. Medina's colleague, Susan Benjamin, emphasized, it cemented her reputation and helped her be heard. When minority women speak up, the difficulty doubles. Speaking to an audience of risk-averse mid-level managers is a challenge for anyone, especially for Carmen Medina, a woman in a male-dominated organization. When I first heard her story, I naively assumed that the era when women were belittled in their careers was long past, and that she would be judged fairly based on the quality of her initiatives rather than her gender. But looking back at everything that happened to her, I was dismayed to discover that even today, women still face many obstacles when daring to express their opinions. In many cultures, there is countless evidence that people today continue to hold outdated views on gender roles. They want men to be strong and women to be submissive. When women speak up, they risk being labeled as violating gender stereotypes. This leads those around them to perceive them as aggressive. Speaking up is an act of someone in a leadership position. And as Sheryl Sandberg wrote in Lean in Asterisk, when a woman demonstrates leadership, she is often labeled as bossy. When analyzing my own data, the results were truly puzzling. In an international bank and a healthcare company, I found that contributing ideas to generate revenue was highly valued for men, but not for women. Other studies show that male leaders who speak up more than their colleagues are applauded, but female leaders who behave similarly are rated lower by both men and women. Similarly, when women make suggestions to improve business, managers rate them as less loyal than men and less amenable to their proposals. Especially in male-dominated organizations, women pay a price if they dare to speak up. In her first attempt to make her voice heard, Carmen Medina paid that price. The level of acceptance for women's behavior at that time was narrower than for men. She said that during her second journey, she had a different experience. Because part of her job was to update information online, she no longer had to worry about being seen as aggressive when clearly expressing her views. In the early 1990s, when everything failed, my passion for this change got mixed up with feelings of personal failure when I thought I couldn't advance further in my career. At that time, I was only thinking of myself, Medina said. This entire second chapter of the journey was truly different from the first. This time, I prioritized the common mission. General research shows that when women speak up on behalf of others, they avoid backlash because they are making a sacrifice for someone else. There is no doubt that the path would be difficult for Medina because she was a woman working in the male-led CIA. As a Puerto Rican woman, she was a member of not just one, but two minority groups. Recent research shows that her dual minority status may have amplified the gains and losses of daring to speak up. Management researcher Ashley Rosette, an African American, found that she herself was treated differently when she acted more assertively than white women and black men. When working with colleagues, she found that members of dual minority groups faced double the risk. When black women failed, they were judged more harshly than black men and white leaders of both genders. They didn't fit the leadership prototype as both black and female, and they bore an unfair share of blame when they made mistakes. For members of dual minority groups, Rosette's team pointed out that failure was not an option. But interestingly, Rosette and her colleagues found that when black women achieved leadership, they did not face the same risks as white women and black men. With dual identity, black women did not have to adhere to some workplace rules. Because people didn't know which identity to apply to them, they could be more flexible in behaving as black or as women without fear of breaking stereotypes. But this only happened when they clearly demonstrated their competence. For minority members, gaining status before exerting power is especially important. By quietly implementing her plan to put information online as part of her job, Carmen Medina consolidated success without drawing too much attention. At that time, I worked quietly, she said. No one really paid attention to what I was doing, and I just kept repeating the process of transforming us into an organization ready to change at any moment. It was very much like a home experiment. I had a lot of freedom to operate. After Medina had accumulated enough preparation, she started speaking up, and this time, people were ready to listen. Rosette found that when women reached the top and there were clear signs they were in control, people had to acknowledge that these women had overcome stereotypes and discrimination, so they must be extraordinarily resilient and talented individuals. But what happens when those voices are not heard? The untraveled path. Donna Dubinsky was not yet 30, and it was the most vibrant time of her life. As Apple's director of distribution and sales in 1985, she worked tirelessly from early morning until late at night, frantically focused on shipping computers to meet booming demand. Suddenly, Steve Jobs demanded the closure of all 6 U.S. warehouses. He wanted to reduce inventory and switch to a just-in-time manufacturing method where computers were assembled to order and shipped quickly overnight by FedEx. Dubinsky believed this was a serious mistake, one that could jeopardize the company's entire future. "In my mind, Apple's success depended on the success of its distribution operations," she said. For a while, she ignored the idea, thinking it would disappear. But the idea didn't disappear, and she began to find reasons why it was a mistake. Distribution was going well, she insisted. Her team was about to have a record sales quarter, and complaints were almost non-existent. Even though she was a master in distribution, her objections were overruled by her superiors. Finally, she was assigned the task of spending several months reviewing Jobs' intentions. In the final session with the team, her boss's superior asked if anyone agreed with Jobs' proposed build-to-order production line. Jobs was in power then, and the majority sided with him. Dubinsky was in the minority. Should she speak up and challenge this chairman, known for many bold ideas, or should she remain silent to please Jobs? Although Dubinsky was one of the few women in a leadership position at Apple in the 1980s, "I never thought gender was an issue for me," she said. She was passionate. She had poured her heart and soul into the company. She was in charge. She was partly responsible for the distribution department. She decided to take a stand and present her arguments against Jobs' proposal. Knowing she needed more time to strengthen her position, she met with her boss's superior and issued an ultimatum. If she couldn't present her own argument within 30 days, she would leave Apple. Making such an offer was a risky move, but her request was granted. Dubinsky came up with a new proposal: strengthen customer service centers instead of switching distribution to a build-to-order system. This would yield the desired benefits without any risks. Her proposal was accepted. "The reason my opinion was heard was due to my performance and the impact I created. People saw me as someone who could make changes happen. If you're known as a value creator, you'll be respected." She had earned status before exerting power, so she had special merit in gaining an advantage. From an outsider's perspective, the prospect of opposing Steve Jobs seemed like a losing battle. But despite his tendency to disagree with her, Jobs was indeed a reasonable man. Dubinsky knew that Jobs respected those who spoke bluntly to his face, and he was open to new courses of action. And she wasn't speaking up for herself. She fought for Apple. For daring to challenge an idea she believed was wrong, Dubinsky was promoted. And she wasn't alone. Beginning in 1981, the Macintosh team started giving an annual award to those who dared to challenge Jobs. And Jobs promoted those successful challengers to run larger divisions within Apple. Comparing the experiences of Carmen Medina and Donna Dubinsky raises fundamental questions about the optimal solution to dissatisfaction. In the quest for breakthrough, you must not ignore what displeases you. Stubbornness is a temporary way to gain a voice. But in the long run, like ignoring problems, stubbornness will stagnate things and become ineffective in resolving your dissatisfaction. To transform the situation, exit and voice are the only viable alternatives. Years ago, Hirschman warned us about a huge limitation of exit. While it has the benefit of helping transform your own situation, it doesn't make the situation better for anyone else because it lets things return to the status quo. Voice, on the other hand, can be effective, Hirschman argued, when you no longer have an opportunity to exit. In recent years, the world has changed in ways that make automatic exit easier. The time when Carmen Medina couldn't find another corporate job after her 1985 CIA controversy is long gone. Spending an entire career at a single organization is a thing of the past. Today's dynamic labor market allows many people to find new positions with new employers. Thanks to globalization, social media, and rapid transportation and communication technologies, we have more flexibility than ever before. With these advantages, if you're unhappy with your job and can easily switch, what reason is there to speak up and pay the price? From Hirschman's perspective, exit is detrimental to breakthrough. But Donna Dubinsky's experience sheds a different light on exit. After winning the distribution battle at Apple, she earned a higher position in global business and marketing at Claris, an Apple software subsidiary. Within a few years, her team generated half of Claris's revenue. In 1991, when Apple refused to let Claris spin off as an independent company, Dubinsky was so frustrated by the lack of opportunity to make an impact that she decided to quit. She flew to Paris and spent a year painting and reflecting on ways to contribute to a larger mission. When she met an entrepreneur named Jeff Hawkins, she decided to become CEO of his startup, Palm Computing, because she believed it would create the next big wave in technology. Under Dubinsky's leadership, this startup developed into the Palm Pilot, achieving resounding success as the first hit in the nascent personal digital assistant market. Palm Pilot stock was issued in 1996, and within a year and a half, it had sold over 1 million units. In 1997, when Palm was acquired by 3Com, Dubinsky disagreed with some strategic decisions. For example, when corporate finance wanted to demand that all departments cut their budgets by 10%, Dubinsky spoke out, persuading the company to invest in areas that were succeeding and cut budgets in other unsuccessful areas. In response to her opinion, the company told her she was not a good manager and should go back and consult with her department. Deeply disappointed, Dubinsky and Hawkins left Palm to found a new company, Handspring, in 1998. Just 1 year later, Handspring launched its Visor handheld computer, and the product quickly captured a quarter of the market. After the brilliant success of the Trio smartphone, Handspring merged with Palm in 2003. Not long after, Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. Years earlier, Dubinsky recalled sitting in a room with Steve Jobs. Jobs said, "There's no way I'm going to design a phone." Was he influenced by us because we had created a great phone and he changed his mind? No, he would never admit it. But despite his stubbornness, Jobs succeeded. It was the lack of a retreat path that pushed Carmen Medina to advance national security. And it was the opportunity to retreat that helped Donna Dubinsky pioneer the smartphone revolution. The lesson here is that speaking your mind isn't always the best way to solve a problem. In some cases, sometimes leaving a restrictive organization can be a better path to originality. The best we can do is voice our opinions, ensure we balance our risks, and prepare exit routes if necessary. If our boss is progressive like Steve Jobs, we can try to stay and speak up. But if not, and stakeholders lack the openness to change their minds, we can find better opportunities elsewhere. Questions that can help us reflect on what might have been. If Medina had left the CIA, could she have succeeded in voicing her idea elsewhere? If Dubinsky had stayed at Apple, would the company have developed the iPhone or come up with other innovations? We will never have answers to these counterfactual scenarios, but we can learn something from the decisions Medina and Dubinsky made. Although one ultimately chose to speak up and the other chose to leave, their choices were similar in one way. They chose to speak out, not to remain silent. And in the long run, research indicates that the mistakes we regret are not due to errors of commission, but errors of omission. If we can overcome these things, most of us will be less critical of ourselves and express our ideas more often. That's exactly what Carmen Medina and Donna Dubinsky did, and it left them with few regrets. Part 4, The Foolish Zealot, the disadvantages of timeliness, strategic procrastination, and being a first mover. Late at night, in his hotel room, a young man stared at a blank piece of paper on the table. Growing anxious, he reached for the phone and sent some ideas to his mentor a few floors below, who then ran up the stairs to his room to discuss the speech that would change history. At 3:00 a.m., the young man was still frantically working, his bones aching, his body feeling like it was collapsing from exhaustion. It was a night in August 1963. Although the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was planned for the next morning, Martin Luther King Jr. had not yet finished preparing his closing speech. He struggled with that speech all night, without a wink of sleep. King's wife, Coretta, recalled, "He was the last speaker, and his words would be broadcast on television and radio to millions across America and around the world. That speech was incredibly important because it would spread inspiration and wisdom to everyone. The march had been announced to the press 2 months earlier, and King knew it would be a momentous event. With extensive media coverage, at least hundreds of thousands were expected to attend. In addition, King had invited several prominent figures to participate and support the event. These celebrities included pioneers of civil rights such as Rosa Parks and Jackie Robinson, actors Marlon Brando and Sidney Poitier, and singers Harry Belafonte and Bob Dylan. There was very little time allotted for the closing speech, so naturally, King began drafting it immediately. Since each speaker was only given 5 minutes, he needed to be especially careful in choosing his words. Great thinkers throughout history, from Benjamin Franklin to Henry David Thoreau to Martin Luther King Jr., have recognized that it takes longer to prepare a short speech than a long one. If it's a 10-minute speech, it will take me 2 weeks to prepare, President Woodrow Wilson said. I can talk as long as long as you don't demand any preparation from me. But King did not begin writing his speech until after 10 p.m. the night before the march. Parents and teachers constantly implore children to start their homework earlier instead of waiting until the last minute. The world of self-help always emphasizes preventing procrastination. But what if procrastination was the reason King created the best speech of his life? In work and life, we are often taught that early, quick action is the key to success because procrastinators lose out. When we have a meaningful task, we are advised to complete it before the deadline. When we have an original idea, like inventing a new product or starting a business, we are encouraged to be a first mover. Of course, there are clear advantages to speed. We can be sure to finish what we start and beat competitors to the market. But surprisingly, as I researched originality, I discovered that the advantages of acting quickly and being first in everything are overshadowed by many disadvantages. It's true that the early bird catches the worm, but we shouldn't forget that the worm also wakes up early and gets caught. This chapter analyzes the question of when we should take original action. When you are preparing to row upstream against the tide, you have choices about whether to start just before dawn, wait until noon, or wait until dusk. My goal here is to dispel common assumptions about timing by evaluating the unexpected benefits of procrastination when we start and finish a task, as well as when we release our ideas into the world. I will discuss why procrastination can be considered a necessary supporting condition, or how first-time entrepreneurs often face an uphill battle, or why older innovators sometimes outperform younger ones, and why leaders who are ready to change effectively are those who patiently wait for the right moment to act. Despite the inherent risks of procrastination, you will also see that waiting can reduce risk by preventing you from putting all your eggs in one basket. You are not the first to express originality, and the most successful originality does not always follow the schedule. They are always late bloomers. Another Da Vinci Code. Recently, a PhD student with an unusually creative mindset named Jin Shin came to me with a curious idea. Procrastination can be beneficial for originality. When you procrastinate, you are intentionally delaying the task you need to do. You might think about the task, but you delay taking steps or completing it with lower productivity. Shin proposed that when you set a task, you use your time to consider divergent thoughts, not just seize a specific idea. As a result, you consider a range of original ideas and ultimately choose a novel direction. I asked her to test this novel idea. Shin asked university students to write proposals for a business, with the goal of building a convenience store in a vacant spot on campus. When students started working immediately, they tended to propose conventional ideas for a convenience store, just like other convenience stores. When Shin randomly assigned some participants to procrastinate by separating them from the assigned task and asking them to play computer games like Minesweeper, FreeCell, and Solitaire, they later came up with more novel business ideas, such as building a tutoring center and a storage facility. Independent raters reviewed the final proposals without knowing who had procrastinated or who had started immediately. The proposals from procrastinators were rated 28% more creative. Although we were very excited about these results, we were concerned that procrastination wasn't the actual cause of creativity. Perhaps playing games helped generate mental stimulation, giving people energy to think more creatively, or simply allowing them to rest, stepping away from work to think freely. But experiments showed that neither gaming nor relaxation boosted creativity. When students in the experiment played games first, before learning about the task, they didn't submit any more novel proposals. To do that, they needed to actually procrastinate while playing games, but still keep the task of generating business ideas in the back of their minds. When they started working immediately and then took a short break before returning to work, they had more positive changes to start over. This only happened when they started thinking about the task and then deliberately procrastinated, because they needed to consider many future possibilities and generate more creative ideas. The procrastination process helped them spend more time considering different ways to complete the task, rather than narrowing down and locking into a specific strategy. Are Shin's findings true in the real world? To find out, she collected data from a Korean furniture company. Employees who frequently procrastinated spent more time considering different directions and were rated by their bosses as significantly more creative. However, procrastination doesn't always foster creativity. If employees don't actively try to solve a big problem, procrastination only drags everything down. But when they are passionate, eager to embrace new ideas, stepping away from work leads them to more creative solutions. Procrastination can be the enemy of productivity, but it can be a resource for creativity. Long before modern humans obsessed over work efficiency, from the Industrial Revolution and the Protestant work ethic, civilizations recognized the benefits of delay. In ancient Egypt, there were two different verbs for procrastination, one for deliberate laziness, the other for waiting for the right moment. It's no coincidence that some of history's most original thinkers and inventors were procrastinators. A prime example is Leonardo da Vinci, whose unique achievements spanned fields from painting and sculpture to architecture, music, mathematics and engineering, geology and cartography, anatomy and botany. Scholars estimate that da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa in intermittent bursts over many years, then stopped painting it, leaving it unfinished, and never completed it before he died. Critics argued that he was superficial and wasted his time with optical experiments and other distractions that prevented him from finishing the painting earlier. Yet, these distractions turned out to help him discover his vital original insights, as historian William Pannebeck explained. For example, Leonardo's studies of how light hits a sphere helped create the continuous lighting model of the Mona Lisa and St. John the Baptist. His work in optics may have delayed the project, but his ultimate achievement in painting depended on these optical experiences. Instead of avoiding distractions like many thinkers of his time, his ideas represented an era of genius ideas, an independent work detached from the old ideas that his other famous works relied on. If creative procrastination was applied selectively and prevented Leonardo from completing some less important tasks, so that his work could be integrated with core harmonious values before completion, only those obsessed with the school of efficient production could criticize him for that delay. The school of efficient production typically demands clear, conventional work principles that will not be altered by anything. But a genius cannot be controlled, and nothing can control them. You cannot schedule or outline work for a genius. Da Vinci spent about 15 years developing ideas for The Last Supper while working on a range of other projects. The painting was initially sketched with characters sitting on a long bench. Decades later, it became the foundation for a new horizontal arrangement with 13 seats at the table in that famous painting. Although he often expressed frustration with his own procrastination, Da Vinci realized that originality couldn't be rushed. He noted that people with genius qualities sometimes succeed best when they work least, because they are thinking beyond their discoveries and forming in their minds the idea of perfection. Procrastination, it turns out, is a common habit among creative thinkers and expert problem solvers. Consider the winners of the Westinghouse Science Talent Search, a competition known as the Super Bowl of Science. For high school students in the U.S., a research team led by psychologist Renée Subotnick interviewed these elite artists more than a decade after their victories, when they were in their early 30s, asking if they often procrastinated in their daily routines, in creative tasks, as well as in social life and health behaviors. Over 68% of those surveyed admitted they procrastinated in at least 2 of the 4 areas. Procrastination was shown to be effective for creative work. Science stars used procrastination as a way to incubate ideas, preventing premature selection of an idea for a problem or solution, as one scientist explained. Often, when I'm procrastinating, it feels like there's a fire burning on my back, and I need time to complete it. Another said, in scientific work, ideas need time to mature, and procrastination is a way to restrain the urge to respond to work hastily. After reflecting on interviews with early aware thinkers and practitioners, Subotnick's team came to a curious conclusion, writing, paradoxically, those who are in the most urgent or the most leisurely situations are the ones who seem to procrastinate the most in creative work. In American history, perhaps only one speech rivals kings in fame, Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. With only 272 words, Lincoln reframed the Civil War as a demand for the freedom and equality proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence. The official invitation to deliver the address reached Lincoln more than 2 weeks earlier. The day before departing for Gettysburg, the president had only drafted half the speech. His secretary, John Nicolay, wrote that Lincoln probably followed his usual careful thought process for such matters, arranging his thoughts by murmuring them aloud, slowly writing and refining them until they took their final form. Ultimately, Lincoln did not write the conclusion until the night before delivering the speech the next morning. He waited patiently because he wanted to develop the most compelling theme. In the early summer days before delivering his "I Have a Dream" speech, King asked 3 close advisors for advice on appropriate content and tone for the speech. Later, King had an open discussion about the speech with Clarence Jones, his lawyer and speechwriter. Then, King asked Jones and other activists to begin writing a draft of the speech. In the weeks that followed, King resisted the temptation to settle on a theme or direction too early. He waited until 4 days before the march actually took place to proactively begin writing the speech. The night before the march, he gathered a group of advisors to review the draft together. As Jones recalled, King said, "This is a landmark moment in our civil rights struggle. We should try our best to get the best ideas from the key figures of the movement." King organized this meeting by explaining that he wanted to review ideas and find the best approach. By delaying the writing task and strengthening the details before writing the speech, King allowed Jones to benefit from the Zygarnik effect. In 1927, Russian psychologist Bluma Zygarnik demonstrated that people have better memory for unfinished tasks. Because once a task is completed, we stop thinking about it. But when it is interrupted and not yet completed, it remains active in our minds. Jones compared his first draft to the evening's discussion topic, something that worked its own way and resonated from deep within my subconscious. 4 months earlier, Jones had met Governor Nelson Rockefeller, a respected philanthropist who enthusiastically supported civil liberties and found funding to bail King out of Birmingham jail. Rockefeller opened a bank account on a Saturday and gave Jones a briefcase containing $100,000. According to bank regulations, Jones had to sign a promissory note, and Rockefeller would pay for it. Recalling his experience the night before King's speech, Jones realized that promissory notes could be a powerful metaphor. The next day, King used it in his speech. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note. But it is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Finally, when King instructed Jones to prepare the final draft, it would incorporate ideas according to his wishes. But that wasn't the only tangible benefit of procrastination: spontaneity and prayer. Half a century after he delivered his momentous speech, the first 4 words of the speech remain etched in our collective memory: "I have a dream." These words remain one of the most famous phrases in human rhetoric because they painted a vivid portrait of a better future. But I was surprised to learn that the "dream" idea was never written into the speech. It did not appear in Jones's draft, nor did King mention it in his script. Throughout the speech, Mahalia Jackson, King's favorite gospel singer, shouted from behind him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." He continued his speech, and she encouraged him again. Standing before a crowd of 250,000 people and millions watching on TV, King began to improvise, pushing his notes aside and guiding everyone towards an inspiring vision of the future. Before everyone, cameras and microphones, Clarence Jones recounted. Martin took flight. Along with needing time to generate new ideas, procrastination also brings another benefit. It helps us unleash our ability to improvise. When we overprepare, we often get stuck in the outline we've created, closing off creative possibilities that could lead us to better new directions in the field we're speaking about. Years ago, Berkeley psychologist Donald McKinnon found that the most creative architects in the U.S. tended to be more spontaneous and unconventional than their technically skilled but conventional peers. Those who always rated themselves highly in self-control and conscientiousness. In a study of pizza chains that I conducted with Francesca Gino and David Hoffman, the most profitable stores were run by leaders who rated themselves as the least efficient and responsive. Similarly, when strategy researchers Suchetan Sharma and Paul Goodman studied nearly 200 companies in India, the most financially profitable companies had CEOs who rated themselves as the least efficient and timely. In both cases, the most successful organizations were run by executives who admitted they often wasted time before sitting down to work and sometimes failed to work at speed to meet deadlines. Although these habits can hinder progress, they help leaders demonstrate strategic flexibility and adaptability. In Indian companies, members of each company's top management team rated their CEOs on strategic flexibility. CEOs who planned carefully, acted early, and worked diligently were generally seen as more rigid. Once they built a strategy, they would get stuck with it. CEOs who tended to procrastinate were often more flexible. They could change their strategies to take advantage of new opportunities and protect the company against threats. When King approached the podium for his speech, even as he neared the microphone, he was still revising it. Just before King spoke, politician Drew Hansen wrote in the Dream asterisk. He broke free from all constraints and scribbled new things while he waited his turn. And it looked as if King was still editing the speech until he stepped onto the podium to deliver it. In the Pulitzer Prize-winning book bearing the cross asterisk, historian David Garrow noted that King improvised like a jazz musician. King acted very naturally, starting with a small improvisation. One of the early written parts of the speech, referring to the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, was a promise that all people would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Standing at the podium, King emphasized racial equality, a promise that all people, yes, black as well as white, must be guaranteed those inalienable rights. 11 minutes into the speech, Mahalia Jackson prompted King to share his dream. It's unclear if he heard her, but he just suddenly decided to change a little bit, King recalled. He let his emotions guide him at that moment and expressed his dream. Before the speech ended, Hansen noted that King had added so much new material that his speaking time doubled. Great originality comes with reasonable procrastination, but it doesn't mean things go off plan. They procrastinate strategically, incrementally refining by exploring and fine-tuning different possibilities. Although the dream part was improvised, King had also spoken about it in various ways in previous speeches. He spoke about his dream nearly a year earlier in November 1962 in Albany. And in the months that followed, he mentioned it frequently, from Birmingham to Detroit. Throughout the year he spoke of his dream, it's estimated he traveled over 275,000 miles and gave over 350 speeches. While King may have delayed writing the dream speech, he had a wealth of material that allowed him to instantly draft and enhance its authenticity. King brought together all the elements of a successful speech, conveying them through his masterful rhetoric. Some parts were taken from other sermons, anecdotes, biblical verses, and lines from beloved poets. Hansen explained, King didn't write too much in the speech, but assembled it by arranging and revising material he had used many times before. It gave King the flexibility to modify his speech as he delivered it. If King hadn't decided to leave out the parts he had written earlier, perhaps his speech at the march would not have been so memorable. After being involved in over 100 startups, Bill Gross, founder of Idealab, conducted an analysis to discover what drove success and what led to failure. The most important factor was not the originality of the idea, the team's ability and execution, the quality of the business model, or available funding. The number one most important thing is timing, Gross revealed. Being timely accounted for 42% of the difference between success and failure. Research shows that in American culture, there is a strong belief in the first mover advantage. We always want to be pioneers, not followers. Scientists rush to make new discoveries before competitors. Inventors rush to register patents before rivals. Entrepreneurs want to launch products before their competitors. If you're the first to enter the world with a new product, service, or technology, you can be elevated to a new level, occupying key space and gaining a monopoly over customers. These things create barriers for competitors who want to enter. Their efforts to innovate will be stifled by your inventions and first-mover advantages, and their growth will be hampered by the reality that it is difficult and expensive to persuade customers to change. In a classic study, two marketing researchers, Peter Golder and Jerry Telles, compared the success of companies, both pioneers and followers. Pioneers were first movers, the first companies to develop or sell a product. Followers were those who launched products later, waiting for pioneers to create a market for the product before entering. Golder and Telles analyzed hundreds of brands across 30 different industries and found a staggering difference in failure rates. 47% for pioneers compared to only 8% for followers. Pioneers were 6 times more likely to fail than followers. Even when pioneers survived, they only captured an average of 10% of the market compared to 28% for followers. Surprisingly, the drawbacks of being a pioneer are often greater than the positives. Upon closer inspection, studies show that pioneers can capture larger market share but have fewer chances of survival and significantly lower profits. Marketing researcher Lisa Bolton concluded, although first movers have many advantages in certain niche industries, academic research on this is still very mixed and overall does not support the first mover advantage. If you are easily tempted to rush into a new field, this knowledge will help you pause and think carefully about the ideal timing to do so. But Bolton also realized something unsettling. Even when people know that the evidence does not support the first mover advantage, they still believe in it. It's also easier to think that pioneers are the successful ones. The failures have long been forgotten, so we still assume they are rare. The best way to debunk the myth of the first mover advantage is to ask people why it creates disadvantages for pioneers. In your experience, what are the 4 biggest limitations of a first mover? Followers are often those who copy business models or products and services, but often lack something. Therefore, instead of catching up with current demand, they wait for the opportune moment until they are ready to introduce a new product. They often enter the market slowly because they are in the process of researching and developing revolutionary products, services, and technologies in that field. In the video game console industry, an interactive computer that outputs video signals to display devices like TVs and computer monitors to show video games, the Magnavox Odyssey was the pioneer in 1972, primarily producing crude sports games. But Nintendo, the follower, was different. This company licensed the Odyssey system and distributed it in the Japanese market in 1975. Then, it beat the Magnavox system in the subsequent decade by creating a Nintendo Entertainment System with iconic games like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. Nintendo changed gaming with a user-friendly controller, complex characters, and interactive role-playing models. To be truly original, you are not required to be a pioneer, but you must certainly be different and do better than your predecessors. When original individuals rush to be pioneers, they can easily overstep boundaries. That's the first disadvantage. Before the internet bubble burst, a young Goldman Sachs banker named Joseph Park sat in his apartment, frustrated when his attempts to access entertainment online failed. Why did he have to go through so much trouble to get to Blockbuster to rent a movie? He just needed to open a website, choose a movie, and the movie would be delivered to his door. Although revenue growth reached $250 million, Cosmo, the company Park founded, went bankrupt. His biggest mistake was making a fragile promise of 1-hour delivery for almost everything and investing in building branches nationwide to support growth that never materialized. A study of 3,000 startups showed that about 3/4 of failed companies were due to immaturity investing too early when the market wasn't ready to accept it. If Park had proceeded slower, he might have realized that with existing technology, 1-hour delivery was impractical and unprofitable. However, the demand for online movies was huge. Netflix gradually emerged from difficulties, and Cosmo could have competed in the mail-order rental and then online streaming segments. He later leveraged technological transitions to help Instacart build logistics that made 1-hour grocery delivery feasible and profitable. When the market is more clearly defined and late entrants step in, they can focus on delivering superior quality instead of just considering what to offer compared to first movers. Do you want the second or third person to see what the first person did and then improve upon it? Malcolm Gladwell asked in an interview. When ideas become truly complex and the world also becomes complex, is it foolish to think that first movers can do everything? Gladwell emphasized, most of the best things take a lot of time to figure out. Second, there's reason to believe that many people who choose to start later may be more suited for success. Risk seekers are often seen as leaders, and they tend to make impulsive decisions. Meanwhile, many businesses only want to take risks from the sidelines, waiting for the right opportunity and seeking to balance their risks before entering the market. In a study of software startups, strategy researchers Elizabeth Pontus and William Barnett found that when entrepreneurs rushed to follow the crowd into booming markets, their startups were less likely to survive and grow. When entrepreneurs waited for the market to settle, they had a higher success rate, needing to follow no rules. Following trends is more likely to lead to market presence, funding, and ultimately, public acceptance. Third, combined with ambition but less recklessness, followers who wait for stability can innovate on competitors' technology to make their products better. When you're the first to bring a new product to market, you bear all the mistakes yourself. Meanwhile, a follower who waits for stability can watch and learn from your mistakes. Being first is a tactic, not a goal, Peter Thiel wrote in *0 to 1*. Being first won't do you any good if someone else comes along and is ready to knock you out of your position. Fourth, while pioneers tend to be stuck with what already exists, followers can observe market changes and shifts in consumer preferences and then adapt accordingly. A study of the U.S. automobile industry spanning nearly a century showed that pioneers had lower survival rates because they struggled to establish legitimacy, develop new market conventions, and then these became obsolete as consumer needs gradually became clear. The value of waiting for the market to be ready before entering has its own merits for followers. When Warby Parker launched, e-commerce companies had already been thriving for over a decade. And although other companies had tried to sell glasses online, they hadn't been very successful. It couldn't be done the way it was before, Neil Blumenthal told me. We had to wait for Amazon, Zappos, and Blue Nile to make customers comfortable buying products that fundamentally they wouldn't want to buy online. This is true even in fields other than business, where key figures with ideas and movements have failed because they were ahead of their time. At the CIA, in the early 1990s, when Carmen Medina first advocated the idea of sharing digital information online for quicker access, the CIA was not ready to consider it. As electronic communication became safer and more familiar, people became more receptive to the ideas. After the September 11th terrorist attacks and the mistaken intelligence on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the value of improved communication among security agencies became even more clearly understood, with immense consequences for a lack thereof. Timing is everything, Medina's colleague Susan Benjamin emphasized. By the time we spoke up, things became so clear that even the most conservative people admitted we had done something different, and the right time for it had come. It was difficult for anyone with a brain not to listen to her and agree that it was a path that needed to be taken. In the 1840s, when Hungarian physician Ignaz Semmelweis pointed out that medical students washing their hands during childbirth significantly reduced mortality rates, he was scorned by his colleagues and ended up dying in a mental hospital. It took 2 decades before his idea gained scientific legitimacy when Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch laid the theoretical foundation for germ theory. Physicist Max Planck once remarked, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die." I don't mean to imply that being a pioneer is entirely unwise. If all of us waited for others to act first, no original ideas would ever be created. Someone has to be the pioneer, and sometimes they pay the price for it. The first mover advantage tends to dominate in fields related to patenting technology or when there are strong network effects, where products or services become more valuable with a large number of users, such as with telephones or social media. But in most cases, your odds of success are not high if you are a first mover. And when the market is uncertain, unclear, or underdeveloped, being a pioneer carries many disadvantages. The key lesson here is that if you have an original idea, it would be a mistake to rush to develop that idea with the sole purpose of beating competitors to the finish line. Just as procrastination can help us be flexible in a task, delaying entry into the market can open up opportunities for us to learn and adapt, reducing originality risks. But what happens when we extend procrastination beyond the task's timeline and the product's life cycle? Throughout a person's life, what is the risk of waiting too long to act? The life cycle of creativity, young geniuses and seasoned masters. It is generally believed that originality stems from the wellspring of youth. According to renowned venture capitalist Vinod Khosla, people under 35 are the change makers. Those over 45 are essentially dead intellectually. After first publishing his revolutionary papers on relativity in his mid-20s, Albert Einstein similarly remarked, "A person who has not made a great contribution to science before the age of 30 will never do anything great later." It's tragic. Innovators often lose their originality over time. After Einstein made his transformative physics discoveries about relativity in 2 papers, he later opposed quantum mechanics, which became a major revolution in physics. "To punish me for my contempt for authority, fate has made me an authority myself," Einstein lamented. This decline, he believed, was unavoidable. However, when companies open suggestion boxes, they find that older employees tend to submit more ideas, and their ideas are of higher quality than those of younger colleagues, with the most valuable suggestions coming from employees over 55. In technology, startups that raise significant funding rounds often have founders with an average age of 38. In the arts and sciences, Chicago economist David Galenson says, "While we quickly remember young geniuses who peak early, there are also many seasoned masters who peak later." In medicine, for every James Watson, who discovered the double helix structure of DNA at age 25, there is a Roger Sperry, who recognized the specialization between the left and right hemispheres of the brain at age 49. In film, for every Orson Welles, who created the cinematic masterpiece Citizen Kane ***. His first film, at age 25, there is an Alfred Hitchcock, who made his 3 most famous films in his 3rd decade of his career: Vertigo at 50, North by Northwest at 59, and Psycho at 61. In poetry, for every E. Cummings, who wrote his first influential poem at 22 and more than half of his greatest works before turning 40, there is a Robert Frost, who wrote 92% of his most widely republished poems after age 40. What can explain these fundamentally different creative life cycles? Why do some people peak early, while others' brilliant periods come later? The timing of our peaks in originality and how long they last depend on our way of thinking. When Galenson studied creators, he discovered 2 completely different styles of innovation: conceptual and experimental. Conceptual innovators typically build a big idea and then meticulously execute it. Experimental innovators solve problems through trial and error, learning and developing as they go. They address a specific problem, but they don't have a specific solution in mind from the outset. Instead of planning ahead, they gradually solve problems as they execute. Writer E.M. Forster famously quipped, "How can I know what I think until I see what I say?" According to Galenson, conceptual innovators are sprinters, and experimental innovators are marathoners. When he studied Nobel laureate economists, on average, conceptual innovators produced their most influential works at age 43, while experimental innovators achieved theirs at age 61. When he analyzed the republished poems of famous poets, conceptual innovators authored their best poems at age 28 compared to age 39 for experimental innovators. And in an independent study of every Nobel Prize-winning physicist, exactly half of the young geniuses under 30 were conceptual innovators who produced seminal works. Among the seasoned masters aged 45 and older, 92% of them created experimental works. The fundamental differences between conceptual and experimental innovators explain why some people peak early while others achieve brilliance later. Conceptual creations can be executed quickly because they don't require years of systematic learning. When Watson and Crick discovered the double helix structure of DNA, they didn't have to wait to accumulate data. They built a theoretical three-dimensional model and tested X-ray images provided by Rosalind Franklin. Furthermore, conceptual breakthroughs tend to occur early because discovering striking originality when we approach a problem with a truly fresh perspective is actually easiest. Conceptual innovators often make their most important contributions to a scientific field soon after they enter it. Galenson found that for this reason, conceptual innovators become less strikingly original once they become entrenched in conventional ways of thinking about problems. As Galenson explains, the inability of aging conceptual innovators to revisit their early brilliant achievements doesn't represent a decline in the magical supply of creative art. Instead, it is generated by the impact of accumulated experience. The true enemy of conceptual innovators is the formation of fixed habits of thought. Conceptual innovators can become prisoners of their initial significant achievements. As a conceptual innovator, this was Einstein's problem. When he developed his famous theory of relativity, he didn't conduct scientific research but imagined experiments. He imagined himself chasing a beam of light. His major contribution to science was ideas and theories that explained the results of others' experiments. Once Einstein had his principles of relativity accepted, he struggled to adapt to the shift away from those principles that quantum physics demanded. In poetry, Galenson pointed out that E. E. Cummings also faced a similar obstacle. After imagining his own rules for language, syntax, and punctuation in his 20s, he entered his 50s, and a critic remarked that Cummings remained an experimentalist on his sole experiment. The interesting thing about Cummings is that he always talked about development and always was. Later, when Cummings was 65, another critic stated that Cummings was a bold and original poet, but his poetry collections were completely identical. As psychologist Abraham Maslow noted, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. However, while experimental creativity may require years or decades to accumulate the necessary knowledge and skills, it becomes a more robust foundation for originality. Roger Sperry spent years conducting experiments with cats and split-brain patients to determine how the brain hemispheres worked. Robert Frost did not write any of his most republished poems in his 20s, and only 8% were written in his 30s. His brilliant period finally exploded in his 40s and again in his 60s. Step by step, poet Robert Lowell observed, Frost observed places and people until his best poems achieved the richness of great novels. Like an explorer, Frost gathered all data by venturing into the world, carefully listening to real conversations. I will never use a word or phrase that I have not heard in a speech, Frost admitted. Each poem is an experiment in blending different elements, not unexpected for writers, nor too unexpected for readers. He delighted in sharing, "When I start writing a poem, I know nothing. I don't want to write a poem that I can say is heading towards a happy ending. You have to have happy discoveries before the end." Conceptual innovators tend to generate original ideas early but risk copying each other. Experimental approaches take more time but are proven to be more novel. Instead of copying existing ideas, experiments allow us to continue exploring new ones. One scholar noted that Mark Twain published Asterisk Adventures of Huckleberry Finn at age 49, using trial and error, and finding that his plot was easily changed as he went, so he wrote the story without any fixed decisions or plans in mind. Twain himself commented that when a short story develops into a long story, the original purpose or main idea can be discarded and replaced by a different, new perspective. To maintain originality as we get older and accumulate experience, the best bet for success is to adopt an experimental approach. We can sketch out a few plans for what we want to create, start experimenting with different types of ideas and exploratory solutions. Ultimately, if patient enough, we can stumble upon something new and useful. Experimental approaches also greatly helped Leonardo da Vinci. He was 46 when he completed The Last Supper, and in his 50s when he began painting the Mona Lisa asterisk. Only by painting did he truly understand and clarify his vision, one scholar wrote, and another suggested that Leonardo worked like a sculptor with clay, never accepting any form as final but always seeking creativity, even at the risk of obscuring his original intention. Martin Luther King Jr. was also an experimental innovator. Although he was only 34 when he delivered the Dream speech, it was his 20th year in public speaking about human rights. At 15, he delivered original speeches on human rights at a statewide final. He spent years in interrupted periods experimenting with words that could clearly express his views. In his thousands of speeches, he constantly practiced different tones and passages. Drawing on experience from a former teacher, he achieved originality, as scholar Claiborne Carson described, by putting old problems into new combinations and new things into old combinations. Good things come to those who wait, and for experimental philosophers, it is never too late to be original. After architect Frank Lloyd Wright received the contract for Fallingwater, his most celebrated architectural work, he delayed for nearly a year, producing scattered sketches before completing the design at age 68. Raymond Davis shared that the Nobel Prize in Physics he received was for research he began at age 51 and completed at age 80. The more experiments you conduct, the less bound you will become by your past views. You learn from what you discover in your audience, your paintings, or your facts. Instead of getting bogged down in imagination, by looking directly at the world, you will improve your peripheral vision. Sprinting is a good strategy for a young genius, but to become a seasoned master, patience in experimentation is required for a marathon. Both paths lead to creativity. However, for those without keen insight, slow and steady experimentation can illuminate the path to originality, even if it takes longer. Of course, not all 65-year-olds who haven't achieved much are undiscovered experimental innovators, author Daniel Pink reflects, but it can reinforce the determination to constantly create, never discouraged, to achieve success, like the persistent tortoise in the story of the tortoise and the hare. So we have finished part 1, Originals, How Non-Conformists Move the World. Perhaps what you have just heard is not new, but the way you look at it may have changed a little. Sometimes the world doesn't change because of big things, but because one person starts thinking differently. Slow down a bit, ask more questions, and stop following the familiar path. Original thinking doesn't make you different immediately, but it helps you stop being carried away by things that don't belong to you. And that alone is enough to start moving. If there's one thing you can take away from this section, it's perhaps not an answer, but a new perspective to rethink on your own terms.